Section 1: The Show That Hides Things in Plain Sight. There is something deeply strange about a show that has been running for over 25 years and still manages to hold secrets. Most long-running series get picked apart so thoroughly by their fan bases that by the time you sit down to watch, there is nothing left to discover on your own. Every Easter egg has been cataloged. Every bit of background detail has been freeze-framed and uploaded somewhere. Every inconsistency has been argued over on forums, until the original question barely matters anymore. Family Guy should be exactly like that. It has been on the air since January of 1999. Hundreds of episodes exist. The characters have been analyzed, dissected, and debated by millions of people across dozens of countries for a quarter of a century. They have been turned into merchandise, made into Halloween costumes, become the subject of academic papers on animated comedy, appeared in dozens of think pieces about what it means for a show to outlive its own creative peak. You would think that by now, everything about it would have been found. Every thread pulled, every question answered or at least identified. And yet, the more time you spend sitting with this show, not just watching it, but sitting with it, in the way you sit with something late at night when the noise has died down and there is nothing around you but the screen and the dark, the more you begin to notice that it operates on at least two levels simultaneously. There is the surface level, the chaos, the cutaway gags, the shouting, the absurdist humor, the shock value, the constant parade of cultural references. This is the show that most people know. This is the show that produces the clips that circulate on social media, and the catchphrases that get repeated at parties, and the characters that end up on budget t-shirts at the shopping center. This is the loud, bright, relentless exterior of Family Guy, the face it presents to the world. And then there is something quieter underneath. Something that the show rarely addresses directly, but that bleeds through in strange moments, in contradictions that seem too consistent to be accidents, in character details that do not quite add up when you track them across seasons, in the eerie way that certain things are treated as jokes when you look at them carefully and realize they are pointing at something the comedy is being used to cover. The show has been doing this since the beginning. Not always consciously, the writers would be the first to tell you that they are making a comedy, not a sustained piece of psychological horror, but the effect is the same regardless of intent. Family Guy, watched with patience and a willingness to follow threads without demanding resolution, reveals itself to be a show quietly obsessed with questions it refuses to answer. What we are doing tonight is letting those quieter mysteries breathe. We are not here to argue about whether the show is good or bad, whether certain seasons hold up better than others, whether specific character changes were justified or not. Instead, we are going to move slowly and carefully through the genuine unsolved questions that the show leaves hanging in the air. Questions about who these people actually are beneath what the show tells us they are. Questions about what this town actually is when you try to locate it on a real map. Questions about whether any of what we are watching is even real within the logic of the show's own universe. Questions about death and time, and the way neither of those things seem to function in quite the normal way in this small Rhode Island coastal settlement. Because here is the thing about Family Guy that most people do not stop to appreciate. The writers have left a remarkable number of threads deliberately loose. A show that appears to function almost entirely on chaos and non sequitur has, underneath all of it, a strange internal consistency to its mysteries. The unanswered questions come back. They resurface. They get referenced from season to season in ways that feel intentional rather than accidental, in ways that suggest someone made a decision to plant something knowing it would not be resolved neatly. And when you lay these threads out in sequence, when you take the time to follow each one back to where it starts and forward to where it leads, without arriving at a clean conclusion, the picture that emerges is genuinely unsettling. Not in the way that horror is unsettling, in the way that a house is unsettling when you have lived in it for years, and you start to notice that the layout does not quite make sense, that there is a room whose door you have never seen open, that the architecture suggests the presence of a space you cannot access from any angle you have tried. Seth MacFarlane built something strange in this town of his, a place where nobody ages despite the decades passing around them, where the dead come back without fully adequate explanation, where a 1-year-old baby has sophisticated weapons in a nursery crib, and the adults around him either cannot perceive this or have made a quiet collective decision not to acknowledge it. Where a man's biography contradicts itself so thoroughly across episodes that it is almost impossible to construct a coherent account of where he came from or who he has actually been. where the family dog is, by any reasonable measure, the most suspicious and the most genuinely mysterious character in the entire cast, a being that should not be possible within the show's own rules about how reality works. Where a woman from one of the wealthiest families in Rhode Island gave up everything she was born into to live in a house that did not officially exist, on a street that may or may not be located within the actual boundaries of any recognized civic authority. Where murders happen without lasting consequence, where people vanish without the world rearranging around their absence, where the whole fabric of reality occasionally folds in on itself in ways that the characters around it register as minor inconveniences at most. Tonight we are going to sit with all of it. Slowly, comfortably, without rushing toward conclusions that are not there. We are going to take each mystery in turn, give it the space it deserves, follow the threads it generates, and sit with the uncertainty that remains after all the following is done. Some of these mysteries have partial explanations, details the show has offered that point in a direction without quite arriving anywhere. Some have fan theories that are genuinely compelling and that change the entire texture of what you are watching if you allow yourself to entertain them. And some are just holes in the fabric of the show that seem to have been placed there on purpose, as if the writers wanted you to fall through them into something below the comedy, into the strange, quiet country that exists on the other side of every joke this show has ever made. The show premiered on the 31st of January 1999, following Super Bowl 33, which meant its first episode was seen by roughly 22 million people who were already sitting in front of their televisions after one of the biggest sporting events on the American calendar. That first episode pulled a number that any series would be grateful for. The show held reasonably well through its first season, averaging about 12.5 million households before Fox began shuffling it across time slots in ways that confused the audience and eroded the ratings until the network canceled it after its third season in 2002. Then the reruns happened on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim block, starting in April 2003, and the audience that had been there all along simply had not been given a stable home to find the show. The DVD sets for the first and second seasons sold over 400,000 copies. The reruns boosted Adult Swim's viewership by 239%. Fox noticed. The show came back in 2005 for a fourth season, and it has been running ever since, moved from Sunday nights to Wednesday nights in the 2023 to 2024 broadcast season, renewed in a multi-season deal with parent company Disney in April 2025 that would take it through season 27 and into the 2028 to 2029 television year, the show's 30th anniversary. Through all of this, the cancellations, the revivals, the decades of creative evolution, the shifting casts of writers, the changing relationship between its creator and the network that airs it, the show has maintained these mysteries. These quiet, persistent, never quite resolved questions that sit at the heart of its fictional universe. Visible, clearly there, impossible to grasp without getting your hands into something the show would rather you treated as a joke and moved on from. So, tonight, we are going to move slowly. We are not in a hurry. There is nowhere else to be. Just one strange fictional town on the coast of Rhode Island, and all the questions it refuses to answer, and the long, comfortable darkness around us while we ask them. Drop a comment letting me know where in the world you are watching from and what time it is. There is something I genuinely love about imagining all the different places this reaches: a bedroom in Japan at 3 in the morning, a couch in Toronto while the snow comes down outside, a warm room somewhere in South America with headphones in and a phone propped up. Tell me where you are. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do. It is free. It helps this channel more than you know, and it means videos like this one keep finding you. Number. Section 2. The Meg Mystery. Who is this girl really? Start with the most overlooked one. Start with the one the show has spent years training you to ignore. Start with Meg. At first glance, Meg Griffin seems like the least mysterious character on the entire show. She is presented as the boring one, the unremarkable one, the girl that the show's own universe has decided is not worth paying attention to. She goes to James Woods Regional High School, later renamed Adam West High School in the town. She is unpopular. She has a few scattered interests that come and go, depending on what episode she happens to be featured in. She has essentially no consistent friend group across the run of the series. Her romantic interests are never reciprocated in any lasting way. She is, by the show's deliberate and sustained design, the character whose function is to be invisible. On the surface, there is nothing there to investigate. She is meant to disappear into the background of every scene she inhabits, and for long stretches she more or less succeeds. But that invisibility, examined carefully, is itself the mystery. Because Meg Griffin has a history and a present that quietly do not add up when you track them carefully. And the more episodes you follow across the show's run, the more you start to notice that something has been hidden inside this character's apparent emptiness. Something that the comedy uses her to conceal, the way a magician uses misdirection, getting you to look at the spectacle of her humiliation so thoroughly that you never quite look at the space behind it where the real thing is happening. Begin with the question of her father, not Peter, her biological father. In the episode Screwed the Pooch, during a courtroom scene of all things, it is dropped almost casually into dialogue that Meg's biological father may actually be a man named Stan Thompson, not Peter Griffin. Stan Thompson, a man whose relationship to Lois and whose subsequent history the show has never adequately developed, is named as the possible biological father of the Griffin family's eldest daughter. This information is delivered in a legal context, buried in the business of a scene about something else entirely, and then essentially left there. The show notes it and continues. Stan Thompson does not become a recurring character who complicates Meg's life in any sustained way. He is not brought face to face with Lois in a scene that forces the question into the open. He simply exists as a shadow at the edge of Meg's origin story, casting a strange light on everything else around her, and the show moves forward. This is not a minor detail to bury in a procedural exchange. If Meg is not Peter's biological daughter, and the show creates the possibility specifically enough that it becomes difficult to dismiss as a throwaway gag, then the architecture of her place in this family changes completely. Peter treating his biological child with contempt and indifference is one kind of story. A sad story about a man whose selfishness and arrested development make him incapable of being the father his children deserve. But Peter treating a child he knows or suspects he did not father a child who is a living embodiment of something in Lois's history that predates him, a reminder of a secret his wife has never disclosed, is a different story. It is darker, more specific, and more coherent in a way that makes the pattern of his behavior across the seasons easier to understand, which in turn makes it more disturbing. Because if this reading is correct, the cruelty is not random. It has a source. And Lois never explains it. The show drops this information and largely lets it sit. Lois, who is present in that courtroom, says nothing that directly addresses the claim. She neither confirms nor denies it. She continues being Lois, and subsequent episodes carry on without anyone returning to what was established in that scene with any intention of resolving it. Consider what this means for Lois as a character. Her full name is Lois Patrice Griffin, born Lois Pewterschmidt, from the Pewterschmidt family of Newport, Rhode Island, a family so wealthy that the Pewterschmidt estate makes the Griffin house look like a garden shed. She gave up that life. She chose Peter, moved to Spooner Street, built a domestic existence that was specifically and pointedly not the life her family had planned for her. And she brought into that domestic existence, from the very beginning, a daughter whose presence may carry a secret she has never disclosed to the man who has been raising the child. Whatever Stan Thompson represented a relationship before Peter, something during the early period of their time together, something else entirely, it preceded everything we have ever watched, and it has never been put on the table. Now look at how Peter treats Meg across the show's full run, with this possibility in mind. In the first 3 seasons, he ignores her. He says insensitive things without appearing to realize they are hurtful. He is a bad father, but in the way that a man who is too self-absorbed and too oblivious to be intentionally cruel is a bad father. He is not targeting Meg specifically. He is simply not seeing her in the way that he often fails to see anyone who is not directly in front of him demanding his attention. The early Peter fails everyone with approximately the same degree of accidental carelessness. But then the show comes back from its cancellation in 2005, and something changes. Not immediately, but progressively and with increasing clarity as the seasons advance. Peter's treatment of Meg begins to escalate from inattention to something that carries a different quality. He makes comments about his daughter's appearance that are not merely insensitive but deliberately aimed. He physically harms her in ways the show frames as comedy, but that, stripped of that frame, describe genuine harm. He expresses, multiple times across multiple seasons, the wish that she did not exist. He laughs when she confronts him about his behavior, not the sheepish laugh of a man caught doing something he knows is wrong, but the genuinely unbothered laugh of a man who finds the confrontation itself amusing. He farts on her face as a recurring entertainment. And in a flashback presented as a punchline, he attempted to abandon her at a fire station when she was an infant, not forgetting her somewhere, not losing her in a moment of chaos, but deliberately bringing a baby to a public location with the specific intention of leaving her there. That flashback is remarkable when you sit with it. The scene is constructed as a joke, but what it is actually describing is attempted child abandonment. It describes Peter and Lois arriving at a fire station with an infant and attempting to leave her there. The attempt presumably failed. Meg exists in subsequent episodes. But the attempt was made. In the show's own canon, Peter Griffin tried to abandon his daughter when she was a baby. If Peter knows or suspects, or has come to believe through the accumulation of something he cannot name that Meg is not his biological daughter, then this history takes on a different quality. Not random cruelty from a thoughtless man. Something more specific. A man who has been, across the years, steadily expressing something that was always latent, who has gradually stopped pretending he is capable of loving this girl the way he loves the children he knows are his. The famous moment in the episode Seahorse Seashell Party in Season 10 illuminates this most clearly. A hurricane has the Griffin family trapped in the house together, and Meg, pushed past whatever threshold she has been maintaining, stands up and confronts each family member in turn. She turns to Peter and delivers an account of his behavior toward her that is specific, verifiable, and completely accurate. Every single thing she names is something the show has actually depicted him doing. She does not exaggerate. She describes reality. And then she turns to Lois and does the same thing. And then to Brian. Each speech is clear-eyed and direct and correct. When the speeches are done, something happens in the episode that many fans found more disturbing than the speeches themselves. The family falls apart. Without Meg absorbing the combined pressure of the household's dysfunction, the family members turn on each other. The equilibrium that existed while Meg was the designated target dissolves. And the episode ends with Meg going to Brian and voluntarily rescinding everything she said, taking it all back, agreeing to return to her role as the family's punching bag, because without her in that role, the family cannot function. The episode makes an argument. It states, through its own ending, that the family's well-being depends on Meg's suffering. That her suffering is not an injustice to be corrected but a structural feature of the household. Remove it, and the structure falls. So it must be maintained. So Meg must return. The argument is presented not as a critique but as a resolution. Meg decides to go back. Order is restored. The episode closes on this as though it is a conclusion rather than an ongoing catastrophe. What the show declines to do is ask what Meg is actually doing with what she knows. Because she does know. The speech proves she knows. She has been watching and listening and understanding with perfect clarity for years. She has been building the speech in her mind, refining it, making it sharper and more precise with every new episode that adds to the evidence. She gave the speech and then took it back. But she did not forget what the speech contained. She did not lose the clarity. She simply chose, in that moment, to prioritize survival over justice. That is a different thing from accepting her situation. That is a person making a calculated decision about the moment. Her hidden life supports this reading. The show drops clues about Meg's interior at irregular intervals and never follows any of them through, which, in a show as self-aware as this one, feels deliberate rather than simply inconsistent. At various points, Meg is shown to have a baby hidden in her school locker, a child she apparently has, apparently deals with between classes, and apparently shoves her textbooks in front of before closing the locker door. The detail appears as a joke and is never addressed again. But a joke about a teenager hiding a baby in a locker still establishes that the teenager has a baby, and the show's failure to return to this thread does not remove the thread from the fabric. She can make realistic bird calls. This is revealed in the episode A Picture is Worth $1,000, in which Peter tries to exploit her one talent for his own gain. The talent is established. Meg can do something specific and real and unusual that she has clearly practiced enough to be good at. She practiced it somewhere, alone, without anyone knowing she was doing it. She can play the saxophone. This emerges in the Simpsons crossover episode in Season 13, when she meets Lisa Simpson. Lisa herself, a gifted but chronically underestimated girl who has found meaning and identity in a musical instrument her family does not fully appreciate, recognizes something in Meg. She draws it out, and it is there. Meg can play genuinely, not as a punchline but as a real thing. The music exists in her and she has been keeping it private. In a future timeline, she is shown to have transitioned and changed her name to Ron Griffin. Whether this is meant as canonical, the show's floating timeline makes future glimpses uncertain. The detail was put there by someone who imagined Meg's future and decided it looked like this. Someone on the writing staff sat with the question of where Meg goes, and the answer they arrived at was, she becomes someone entirely different. She remakes herself. That is not the future of someone who has given up. That is the future of someone who was always planning to leave, who was always maintaining something behind the patience, who has a destination even if the show has never told us what it is. Meg Griffin is the most psychologically coherent character in the show. She is a person who understands exactly what is happening to her and has chosen a specific strategy in response, not submission, but strategic patience. She is the daughter of a man who may not be her biological father, carrying all the weight of that uncertainty in a house that has never offered her a direct conversation about it. She is a girl with a complete interior life that she keeps concealed from the people around her because the people around her have never demonstrated that they deserve access to it. She is waiting. The show has never told us for what, but she is waiting with the patience of someone who knows that the moment will come even if she cannot see when. And when it comes, she will be ready. She has been getting ready for a very long time. Section 3. The Stewie Paradox, Evil Genius, Traumatized Child, or something else entirely? There is a question that the show poses in its very first episode, and then never cleanly answers across 20-plus seasons. What is Stewie Griffin? Not who. What? Because the question of what Stewie actually is, what category of being he belongs to, what the rules are for something like him, what would actually happen if you followed the logic of his existence to its conclusion runs deeper than the question of who he is as a character, and the show's inability or unwillingness to settle on a coherent answer has produced, over time, a genuinely fascinating and faintly terrifying mystery that sits at the center of the whole enterprise without ever being fully acknowledged. Start with what we know for certain, or think we know. Stewie is 1 year old. He has been 1 year old since 1999, which is its own kind of mystery, but one the show's floating timeline applies equally to all characters. He is the youngest child of Peter and Lois Griffin. He has a football-shaped head, elongated and specific in a way that no other character in the show shares, a head shape that the show has given various comic explanations for at different points without settling on an official one. He was apparently not supposed to exist. Buried in the show's canon, almost as an aside, is the detail that Peter had a twin who is implied to have been killed by Stewie during childbirth, a twin named Dave. This detail is not given an episode of its own. It is not explored in any sustained way. It is dropped into the background of the show's history and left there, but the implication is clear. Stewie's very first act in the world, before he had fully arrived in it, was to remove a competitor. His existence began with the elimination of the person who would otherwise have shared his position. He did not ask to be the only baby, he simply made himself the only baby. His British accent has never been satisfactorily explained. He speaks with the clipped, precise elocution of a particular English villain archetype, the Bond villain, the theatrical sorcerer, the kind of voice that announces its own confidence and sophistication and fundamental indifference to other people's comfort. He was born in Rhode Island to 2 American parents. There is no British heritage mentioned anywhere in the Griffin family backstory. No explanation for why a baby born in New England to Americans sounds like he was educated in the English school system is ever provided. The show has had over 25 years to address this and has chosen not to. Either it is not significant, a stylistic choice to give the character his distinctiveness, or it is significant, and the British accent is a clue to something about Stewie's nature or origin that the show has decided to leave in the category of things it will not explain. His intelligence is the central impossibility. Stewie is 1 year old and he understands quantum mechanics, temporal displacement, and the theoretical underpinnings of interdimensional travel. He can design and build a working time machine, a device he has used in canon multiple times to travel to different points in history and to alternative present moments. He has constructed energy weapons capable of causing lethal harm. He has built mind control devices, weather modification systems, shrink rays, and various other instruments of science fiction level engineering. He has the theoretical knowledge of a physicist operating at the frontier of speculative science. He is simultaneously designing weapons capable of ending the world and still occasionally needing to be changed. This juxtaposition is the engine of his early comedy. The gap between what Stewie looks like an infant in a yellow shirt and a diaper, sitting in a high chair eating strained peas, and what Stewie is actually saying and doing in any given scene is the source of the humor. The contrast is the thing. A tiny being that is physically helpless in every conventional infant way, becoming briefly and completely undone by the sensation of his mother blowing on his belly button, while simultaneously delivering precise monologues about the logistics of global domination. But as the seasons went on and the show built out its universe, a different kind of question formed around the impossibility of his intelligence. Not just the abstract, how does he have it? The show was never going to explain that, but the more practical and more disturbing, what does it mean that he has it? And what does it mean that nobody around him is doing anything about it? The Griffin household contains a 1-year-old baby who is, by any measurable standard, vastly more intelligent than any of the adults around him. He has built weapons in his room. Not toy weapons, actual functional weapons that have been fired, that have injured people, that represent the kind of engineering capability that governments spend enormous resources trying to develop. The nursery at 31 Spooner Street contains, behind the crib and below the changing table, a hidden laboratory with capabilities that would be remarkable in a fully funded research institution. And Lois carries him to his bottle, and Peter watches television in the next room, and nobody mentions the laboratory. The question of whether the adults can actually see and hear Stewie has been one of the show's most persistently interesting unresolved elements. The show has never settled on a consistent answer. In some episodes, adults around Stewie treat his speech as babbling as the sounds that babies make, incomprehensible and not expected to carry meaning. In other episodes, characters respond directly to specific things Stewie has said, in ways that require them to have understood not just that he made sounds, but what those sounds meant. The show moves between these two states without comment, sometimes within the same episode. In the 2-part episode, Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie in Season 6, the entire Griffin family is shown to understand Stewie completely once they are made aware of what he is. They sit with him and have a real conversation. And in that conversation, Stewie says something that is quietly devastating. He complains that the family is only now interested in him, now that they know he is an evil genius. He notes that the previous week, Peter had ignored his macaroni picture of an owl. Think about what this reveals. Stewie has been making macaroni art the most ordinary, the most expected, the most conventionally babyish thing a 1-year-old could produce and showing it to his father. And his father has not looked at it. Peter walked past the picture and continued on with his day. And Stewie noticed. The baby who builds time machines and plans world domination was also, that same week, making art and hoping someone would acknowledge it. Both things were true simultaneously. The evil genius was also just a baby wanting his father to look at the owl he made. This detail is one of the most humanizing in the entire show's history, and it comes in the middle of an episode about Stewie finally killing his mother, which tells you a great deal about how this show handles the things it knows are true about its characters. Brian has always been able to understand Stewie. This has been established from the earliest episodes. Their conversations have been clear and reciprocal from the start. They speak to each other as though this is simply how it is, without comment, without confusion. Brian hears Stewie and Stewie hears Brian, and the two of them exist on the same communicative frequency that the rest of the household has never been able to access. What does it mean that a dog can hear a baby when that baby's own parents cannot? There is a fan theory that has been circulating in the show's community for a long time, and that has genuine explanatory power. The theory proposes that the entire show is a manifestation of Stewie's perception of the world. What we are watching is not objective reality, but the way an infant with an extraordinary mind processes and makes sense of the chaos surrounding him. In this reading, everything is filtered through Stewie's perception. Peter appears foolish and enormous and reckless, because that is genuinely how the world looks from below the level of a coffee table, from the perspective of someone who is physically small and dependent and surrounded by adults who move with terrifying carelessness through spaces they barely notice. Lois is simultaneously kind and overwhelming. Brian talks because to Stewie, who understands that the dog is a member of the family, the dog ought to be able to speak as everyone else in the family does. The adults do not understand Stewie's speech as speech. because Stewie knows, at some level, that they do not, and his perception, which is generating everything we see, reflects this knowledge. The cutaway gags, in this reading, are the way a child's mind processes information not linearly, not sequentially, but associatively and digressively, jumping from one image or idea to another with the logic of attention rather than the logic of narrative. An infant's mind does not maintain coherent story structure. It follows what is vivid and surprising and strange. The cutaways are Stewie's cognition in motion. But this reading has a problem. The most important problem is the things Stewie has actually done. Within the show's own canon, Stewie Griffin is one of the most genuinely dangerous characters in the history of animated television. Not in the way Peter is dangerous through stupidity and an inability to anticipate consequences. Stewie is dangerous in the way that a being is dangerous when it combines complete ethical disengagement with extraordinary capability and the focused will to act. The Club of Forgotten Children. In an episode that treats this as backstory, it is established that Stewie once imprisoned a group of toddlers in a secret underground space because they had displeased him. He named it the Club of Forgotten Children. He built it. He put children in it, and then the show moves on to the main plot and the children in the pit are not mentioned again. No one rescues them in a subsequent scene. The show simply introduces the detail and continues. The children are simply there, underground, in a space Stewie built and named with the specific word, forgotten. This is presented as a joke, and yet the content of what it is describing, a 1-year-old baby imprisoning a group of children in an underground location and then abandoning them, there is not something that comedy framing actually neutralizes. The children were put there by a being who was capable of building their prison and was not capable of caring that they were in it. He shot Diane Simmons. In the Season 9 premiere, positioned as a murder mystery episode, Stewie Griffin operated a sniper rifle and killed a woman. Not accidentally. He positioned himself, he aimed, and he fired. The episode presents this as a dramatic reveal, a surprising answer to the mystery of who the killer is, and it sits in the show's canon as a fact. Stewie Griffin has committed murder. He has killed a person with deliberate intent and has not, across any subsequent episode, experienced any consequence or shown any particular response to the fact of having done this. And then the show went on. Season 10 happened. Season 11 happened. 25 years of episodes happened, with Stewie in nearly all of them, and the murder of Diane Simmons sits in the background of all of it as an established fact that nobody has ever addressed. And then, in the midst of all of this, the imprisoned children, the murder, the weapons, the plans, there is the macaroni owl. And there is the episode Brian and Stewie, where they are locked in a bank vault overnight and just talk, and where the depth of Stewie's love for Brian becomes clear in a way that is completely unlike anything the surrounding comedy would lead you to expect. And there is the moment in Christmas Guy, when Stewie uses time travel to go back and save Brian's life. And the desperation in that mission, the intensity with which he pursues it, the completeness of his relief when it succeeds is one of the most genuine emotional moments in the entire series. Stewie Griffin contains all of these things simultaneously. The capacity for harm on a scale that most characters in most shows could not approach, and the grief of a child whose best friend almost died and who was not willing to accept that outcome. The weapons in the crib and the macaroni owl, the murder, and the friendship. What happened to this baby? The show's writers answer this as a creative decision. They felt the evil genius premise had run its course. They wanted to develop the Stewie-Brian dynamic. They found more material in the softer version of the character. These are legitimate creative rationales. But within the show's own fiction, in the universe where Stewie is real, something changed. The closest the show ever came to acknowledging the change was in the 2-part episode where Stewie finally, in a simulation, achieved everything he had been planning, killed his mother, took over the world, became what he was always building toward. And then the simulation ended, and none of it was real. And after that, he never really tried again. What did Stewie see in the simulation that made him stop trying? The show gave him the victory and then revealed it to be hollow. Maybe seeing the end of the project, seeing himself as the dictator he had always planned to become, was sufficient to remove the project's appeal. Or maybe seeing what it cost, even in the simulation, was the thing that changed the calculation. The show has never said. Stewie keeps his laboratory. He keeps the time machine. He keeps the weapons. Occasionally uses them for other purposes. But the world domination has essentially stopped. The attempts to kill his mother have faded into occasional references to what used to be rather than active plans. Something was seen in the simulation, and something changed. And the Stewie who remains still extraordinary, still more complex than anyone around him, still capable of both remarkable love and remarkable harm, is the Stewie who looked at the end of his own ambition and decided, quietly, to want something else. What he wants is Brian. That much the show has made clear. Whatever else has changed, whatever has been retired or redirected, the friendship with Brian is the thing that remains. And it is the thing that, in one possible reading of the show, saved the world from Stewie, or saved Stewie from the world he would have made. Section 4. The Brian Griffin Problem. The Dog Who Knows Too Much. The mystery of Brian Griffin is, at its most fundamental level, the mystery of a character who should not be possible. Not as a creative choice in the early seasons, Brian was by widespread agreement one of the best and most interesting elements of Family Guy. The writing around him was sharp, his function in the ensemble was clear and well executed, and the friendship between him and Peter in those early years was one of the show's genuine emotional anchors. The mystery of Brian Griffin is a literal one. Within the logic of the show's own universe, Brian should not exist in the way that he does. He is a dog. This is established and never contradicted. He is not a person who has been transformed into a dog, not a magical creature of ambiguous nature, not a human in a dog body in any explicit sense. He is a dog, a Labrador, specifically, or something close to it, who was found as a stray by Peter Griffin and brought to live at 31 Spooner Street. He has been with the family since before the first episode. He is, in practical terms, Peter's closest friend and Stewie's only true confidant. He also walks on two legs, sits at bars and orders martinis, holds a valid driver's license, has dated multiple human women across the show's run, aspires to fame as a novelist and playwright, has published work that critics within the show's universe have reviewed, and engages in conversations about temporal mechanics and quantum theory with the ease of someone who finds the subject genuinely interesting. Other dogs in the show's universe do not do any of these things. The other dogs in the show are ordinary dogs. They sniff things. They bark. They do not discuss the existential implications of their literary failures over a glass of scotch. Brian is a complete and unexplained anomaly within the rules of the world he inhabits, and the show has spent 25 years building emotionally resonant stories around this anomaly while declining to offer any explanation for why it is possible. The most serious and widely discussed theory about Brian's nature, the one that has attracted real engagement from the fan community, and that has genuine explanatory power across multiple aspects of his character, proposes that Brian Griffin is the product of a CIA genetic experiment. This sounds more extreme than it is when you consider the context. Family Guy and American Dad exist in the same narrative universe. This has been established through direct crossover episodes and through sustained mutual references that both shows have maintained across their runs. American Dad is explicitly about the CIA, and across its seasons the show has established that the organization possesses and deploys technology that goes well beyond what would be considered realistic or ethical. This includes technology for creating simulated domestic environments, for conducting extended psychological experiments on unwitting subjects. The CIA of American Dad is an organization that has already demonstrated, within the shared fiction of these two shows, the willingness and the capability to do exactly what the Brian as experiment theory requires. What would the CIA want with a genetically modified dog placed in an ordinary Rhode Island household? This is where the theory gets genuinely interesting, because it requires engaging with what is unusual about the Griffin household specifically. Peter's background, which we will examine in the next section, is riddled with the kinds of inconsistencies that would give an intelligence agency reason to pay attention. He was born under unusual circumstances that left his citizenship status technically unresolved. His biological parentage is more complicated than it appears on the surface. His marriage placed him in proximity to one of the most economically powerful families in Rhode Island, the Pewterschmidts, whose patriarch Carter owns U.S. Steel and Pewterschmidt Industries, and whose politics and business practices would be of natural interest to an organization like the CIA. The Griffin household in this reading is not a random selection. It is a specific placement. Brian, in this framework, is the observation apparatus. He is placed inside the family as a pet, the most natural and least suspicious presence in a domestic environment, and he is built to be exactly what he appears to be. A dog who is also intelligent, who is also present, who is also able to maintain relationships that allow him ongoing access to the family's internal life. His human-level intelligence is not a side effect of the experiment. It is the point of the experiment. He needs to be able to understand what he is observing. He needs to be able to generate reports that are coherent and analytical, rather than simply the recordings of an animal. The early seasons of Brian's characterization support this reading in ways that feel almost too neat. Early Brian is observational. He watches. He registers. He is consistently the character who most clearly articulates what is happening in any given situation, who names the dynamic, who sees the problem, who identifies the thing that everyone else is not quite saying. He is the voice of reason, yes, but a voice of reason who almost never actually prevents anything from happening. He points out the problem, and then he watches the problem unfold. He identifies the bad decision, and then he watches the bad decision be made. He is, functionally, an extremely intelligent and perceptive witness who has been given implicit instructions not to intervene, to watch and to note, and to let events proceed. The deterioration of Brian's character in the later seasons, the selfishness, the self-destructiveness, the gap between his claimed values and his actual behavior, the way he becomes increasingly erratic and occasionally harmful, can be read through this lens as what happens to an intelligence asset over time when the mission loses its structure, when the handler becomes remote, when the original purpose has been superseded by the accumulated weight of years spent in a specific place with specific people. The asset was in the field. The field became home. The people the asset was watching became the people the asset cares about, in ways that the training or the design did not account for. And without the structure of the mission to maintain the professional distance, the asset starts to behave like a person who is lost, who has a cover story that is more real to him than the thing underneath it, and whose behavior becomes increasingly chaotic as the gap between the two widens. In the episode Brian and Stewie, the Season 8 episode that is almost universally regarded as the finest thing the show ever did, the episode that strips away everything else and simply lets two characters talk honestly in a locked bank vault for 22 minutes, Brian reveals that he keeps a firearm in a safety deposit box. He tells Stewie, in direct and quiet words, that he sometimes thinks about ending his own life. He has not decided to, but he maintains the option. He keeps it accessible. This is an extraordinary thing for a comedy show to include. The episode handles it with care. It does not sensationalize. It does not use the detail for shock value. It allows the revelation to land in the silence between Brian saying it and Stewie responding. And Stewie's response, which is one of the most emotionally complete things the character has ever produced, is to tell Brian that he is the most important thing in Stewie's world, that he cannot have the option, that if Brian were gone, Stewie would not know how to be. What does Brian know about himself, about his existence, about the nature of the reality he inhabits that makes his life feel so unbearable at its lowest points? What does a talking dog, with access to resources that ordinary dogs could not have, with a driver's license and a published novel and a complex interior life, have to be so profoundly miserable about? The show leaves this open. It gives us the revelation and Stewie's love, and then it lets the episode end, and subsequent episodes continue, and the mystery of what Brian knows sits unanswered. The second theory about Brian, smaller in scope but more specific to the show's own mechanics, proposes that Brian is the actual author of Family Guy, that what we are watching is Brian's novel, the novel he has been failing to finish for 25 years. The project that the show references continuously as a joke about Brian's pretensions and his inability to produce the work he claims to be capable of. In this reading, Family Guy is the work. The characters are projections. Peter is Brian's version of uncomplicated appetite. Lois is Brian's idealized but unattainable woman. Meg is Brian's contempt for vulnerability. Stewie is Brian's dark imagination given form and mobility. The show's universe, with all its chaos and cruelty and occasional beauty, is the interior of Brian Griffin's mind made visible. The cutaway gags are Brian's digressions. The floating timeline is the novelist's prerogative to set events whenever they need to be set, without being accountable to an external calendar. The inability to allow permanent consequence is the writer pressing reset, trying the scene again, unwilling to commit to an ending because once the ending is committed to, the novel is done. The novel has been going for 25 years. It is not finished. It may never be finished. That is the longest-running joke the show has ever told, and it is also In this reading, the truest thing about Brian Griffin, a writer who cannot stop, cannot finish, and who maintains a safety exit for the day the maintenance becomes too much. Number. Section 5. The Quagmire Conspiracy. What is he actually hiding? Glenn Quagmire lives at 29 Spooner Street, immediately next door to the Griffin household. The show has told us the broad strokes of his life across 25 years. Former ensign in the United States Navy, current commercial airline pilot, resident of Spooner Street for as long as the show has been set there, one of Peter Griffin's closest friends since they were young men. His driver's license, shown in the episode Foxy Lady, gives his age as 61. He attributes his younger appearance to a diet heavy in carrots, which the show presents as a joke, and which the show has also never directly contradicted as a factual claim within its own universe. He was born Glenn Quagolchek, a name that the show has never explained, and that sits in the background of his biography as one of those details that seems to signal something without ever specifying what. 61 years. The show's floating timeline means this age was established at a point in the show's narrative present that was roughly the mid to late 2000s, which places his birth in the 1940s. He served in the Navy at some point. He attended high school with Peter, Cleveland, and Joe, which the show treats as an established shared history, even though fitting all of them into the same graduation year requires some flexibility with the individual timelines involved. He came to Spooner Street at some point prior to the first episode as part of an already established neighborhood group, a man who belonged there before the show began and has simply continued to belong there as the decades have passed. 61 years of Glenn Quagolchek, later Quagmire. The show has spent approximately 25 of those years on screen. The other 36 exist in the background of his character, referenced occasionally in flashback or backstory detail, but never laid out in any sustained way. And what happened in those 36 years, what the Navy years contained, what the name change was about and when it happened and why, what built the pattern of behavior that the show has been documenting since 1999 remains almost entirely unexplored. The game of I Never in the episode Perfect Castaway is the most economical illustration of the strangeness at Quagmire's center. Peter and the friends play the drinking game at the Drunken Clam, each naming something they have never done, anyone who has done it obligated to drink. The game escalates through the ordinary and into the specific and extreme, and at each escalation, Quagmire drinks. All of it. Every item named. The list gets increasingly inventive and increasingly particular, ranging into territory that most people would not have a framework for even imagining, and Quagmire drinks for every item on it. The game establishes, through this accumulation, that in 61 years Glenn Quagmire has done every imaginable thing, without exception. Played as comedy, the escalation and Quagmire's progressively more defeated expression as each new item appears is funny. The content of the scene, what it is actually establishing, is something different. A man for whom no limit has ever functioned as a limit. A man who, across 61 years, has proceeded through everything available to proceed through without being stopped by any internal mechanism. The scope is the revelation. The mystery of Quagmire is not simply about what he has done. It is about the coexistence of what he has done with the character he otherwise presents himself as being. Because Quagmire, across the show's run, is not consistently monstrous. He has genuine loyalty to Peter, to Cleveland, to Joe. He shows real care for people he has decided matter to him. His relationship with Ida Davis, his father, who underwent gender transition surgery, is one of the show's more sustained and emotionally honest explorations of a complicated parental bond. Quagmire loves Ida. He struggles with what the transition means for his understanding of his own past. He works through it over the course of several episodes, and he arrives at acceptance that feels genuine rather than convenient. The show treats this arc with seriousness. He is also the person who delivers, in the episode Jerome is the New Black, one of the most famous speeches in the show's history. The speech in which he tells Brian Griffin directly and specifically exactly why he dislikes him. Every point Quagmire makes is accurate. Every accusation is backed by things the show has actually depicted. The speech is devastating not primarily because of what Quagmire says about himself. He does not say much about himself, but because of what his ability to see Brian so clearly reveals about Quagmire's own intelligence, moral perception. He sees through the gap between who Brian claims to be and who Brian actually is. He identifies the hypocrisy with the precision of someone who has studied it. He can articulate what is wrong with Brian's behavior because he genuinely understands the difference between claimed values and actual values. This is not the moral perception of a man who lacks the capacity for ethical thought. This is the moral perception of a man who has the capacity very clearly and who applies it selectively. Quagmire can see the difference between who someone claims to be and who they are. He has simply decided that this clarity applies only in certain directions. In the direction of his own behavior, he has chosen not to look. He maintains the blind spot deliberately. He operates the clarity and the blind spot simultaneously, as separate systems that do not have to interact. Why? This is the core mystery. Not what he has done, but why a man with this quality of moral perception has chosen to maintain the blind spot. The answer the show hints at without pursuing is in his family. In Ida, in the man who raised him, who he loved, who turned out to be in a fundamental way different from what Quagmire had understood him to be. The revelation about his father's identity came when Quagmire was already an adult with established patterns of behavior. It cannot have caused the patterns, but it illuminates something about the environment in which those patterns were established. What kind of childhood did Glenn Quaglecheck have? What was his relationship with his father before he understood who his father was? The show has not shown us this. It has given us the adult Quagmire and gestured at a backstory that would explain the present without committing to showing us that backstory. There is a version of this character's history in which the pattern of his adult behavior is the entirely comprehensible consequence of things that happened before the show started in the years that are not on screen. In the family dynamic that produced Glenn Quaglecheck before he became Quagmire. The show prefers to present the consequence and leave the origin in the off-screen years where it cannot be examined. Annalee Quagmire is worth addressing specifically because she represents the show's most direct acknowledgement of what Quagmire's history means for someone who comes after him. She is introduced in the episode Quagmire's Baby. She is the daughter Quagmire did not know he had. He makes the arrangements to give her up for adoption. And then he holds her. He looks at her. He names her after a Warrant song which is entirely Quagmire, and the show knows it is entirely Quagmire and he chooses to keep her. This is presented as a heartwarming resolution. Quagmire, confronted with his own child, chooses to be her father. The episode ends on this choice, and then the show largely does not address it again. Annalee Quagmire is in the canon. She exists. She is the daughter of a man whose 61 years of history are documented in the show's universe with uncomfortable specificity. She is growing up somewhere in or near the town where the show is set, and the show introduced her, had her father make a choice that felt like the beginning of a storyline, and then let her disappear into the background. Where is she? What does she know about her father? What is being passed on to her, through proximity or through absence, from the 61 years that preceded her? The show created a child and left her in the gap between what it chose to show and what it did not. Section 6. Peter Griffin's Missing Years. The timeline that cannot be assembled. Peter Griffin is the main character. He is the center of the show's gravity, the largest and loudest and most persistently present figure in every scene he inhabits. He is, by the show's consistent assertion, a man in his early to mid-40s. The specific number varies depending on what a given episode requires. Living with his family at 31 Spooner Street in the coastal Rhode Island town where the show is set, he drinks Pawtucket Patriot Ale. He watches television with the devotion of a person who has elevated it to a form of spiritual practice. He has, across the show's run, been a factory worker, a brewery employee, a fisherman, a pirate, a Renaissance Fair participant, a knight, a mayor, a newspaper publisher, a stand-up comedian, and approximately 40 other things for the duration of a single episode before returning to his position at the brewery as though the other episodes did not happen. He was born in Mexico City, not in Rhode Island, not in the United States in any straightforward or legally unambiguous sense. In Mexico City, specifically during an attempted abortion, his mother Thelma was in Mexico to terminate a pregnancy, and the procedure resulted instead in a live birth. Peter Griffin's entry into the world occurred in the middle of an attempt to prevent his entry into the world. His existence began against the expressed wishes of the person who was responsible for it. This is the show's own backstory for its own main character, established in the episode Padre de Familia, and delivered with the casual weight that the show applies to details it wants you to notice without pressing you to follow the implications. Thelma brought the baby back to Rhode Island. Peter grew up there, in the Catholic faith, raised by a man named Francis Griffin, who he believed for most of his life was his biological father. Francis was strict, deeply religious, morally demanding in ways that produced in Peter, through some combination of rebellion and simple incapacity, precisely the opposite qualities: flexibility, carelessness, and an ethical framework that has never recovered from the decades Peter spent successfully avoiding the rules Francis tried to teach him. Peter's biological father is not Francis Griffin. This was established in the episode Peter's Two Dads. His biological father is Mickey McFinnigan, an Irish man living in Ireland, who had a relationship with Thelma Griffin at some point before or during her marriage to Francis, who fathered a child he had no knowledge of, and who Peter eventually travels to meet. Mickey McFinnigan is warm and drunk and funny in the way of people who have used alcohol to smooth over everything they preferred not to feel. He and Peter share several qualities, which is both illuminating and slightly uncomfortable to observe. Peter is therefore a man who was born in Mexico during an abortion, raised in Rhode Island by a man who was not his biological father, and who discovered in adulthood that his actual father was an Irish man he had never met. He is also, the episode Padre de Familia established, technically not a legal American citizen. Thelma never filed the appropriate paperwork after bringing him back from Mexico. He has been living and working and having children in the United States for his entire adult life, without the documentation that would make his presence there legally formalized. His birth certificate, shown in the episode Quagmire's Mom, gives his birthplace as the town where the show is set. His actual birth happened in Mexico. These two things cannot both be true. The show has presented both as true, in different episodes, for different narrative purposes. His age is genuinely impossible to pin down across the show's run. Different episodes have given him different ages at different points in his history, and the birth years that can be calculated from these stated ages do not agree with each other. His most recently stated canonical age in a specific episode is 45, as of The Jersey Boar. In a future set scene, he claims to be 58. These numbers, placed in the show's floating timeline, create a character whose age is fundamentally whatever the current episode requires it to be. But the contradictions in Peter's personal history go beyond the simple inconsistency of an unaged character. His backstory, the specific events the show has claimed are part of his biography, contains contradictions that feel more deliberate than accidental. His relationship with his high school friends is one example. The show has established that Peter, Cleveland, Joe, and Quagmire all attended the same high school together. Their friendship, therefore, goes back decades to adolescence, to the early formation of adult identity. And yet the individual timelines of these characters, when placed alongside each other, do not quite fit into a coherent shared school history. Quagmire's stated age puts him significantly older than the others. Joe's injury, which the show establishes happened when he was young, implies a specific timeline that is hard to square with the high school friendship narrative. The shared history is consistently referenced, but never laid out in a way that holds together when you try to construct it sequentially. Peter's House 31, Spooner Street, has its own mystery embedded in the episode E, Peterbus Unum. A surveying error reveals that the Griffin House is not technically part of the town, not part of the county, not part of Rhode Island, not part of the United States. The house sits in a gap between legally recognized territories, a space that has never been assigned to any governing body. This leads to Peter declaring the house an independent nation, which is played for comedy. But the underlying detail that 31 Spooner Street was not on any map, was not part of any jurisdiction, was simply existing in a space that official structures had not accounted for, is quietly remarkable. A man born during an abortion in Mexico, whose citizenship was never formally established, living in a house that was not officially part of any country. The two facts mirror each other. Peter Griffin exists in the gaps between legal statuses, between documented histories, between the official version of his biography and the various contradictory things the show has placed inside it. He fell through every crack there was and landed on Spooner Street, in a house that also fell through every crack, and built a life there in the space that nothing else was using. The deepest mystery in Peter's history is the one the show has circled without quite engaging: the transformation between the Peter of the early seasons and the Peter of the later ones. The show's creators have acknowledged the change, critics have documented it, fans have debated what it means. But within the show's own fiction, in the world where Peter Griffin is a real person with a real history, the question is about what happened to him. What produced the man who shoved his wife underwater to escape a fin in the water and then drove the boat away? What produced the man who laughs when his daughter tells him he is a terrible father? People change, sometimes dramatically, sometimes in ways that are not explained. But the change in Peter is so complete and so thoroughly removes the person who was there before, the man who apologized to his wife at the end of episodes and meant it, who had moments of genuine warmth with all three of his children, whose stupidity felt like an innocent accident rather than a personality characteristic, that it feels less like a change and more like a replacement. Somewhere in the run of the show, the original Peter Griffin simply stopped being present. And whoever took his place knows the right address and the right wife's name and the right friends. But something is missing. Something that was there before has been quietly removed. The show has never accounted for this. The Peter of 2025 shares a name and an address and a voice with the Peter of 1999. And the distance between the two has been growing, season by season, into something the show treats as normal because at some point it became the only Peter the show knew how to write. What happened to Peter Griffin? The show has never said. The house is still there. The beer is still cold. The man sitting in the chair is still called Peter. But he is not quite the same man who sat down in it in 1999. Section 7. The Death Problem. Why nobody in this town stays gone. Death in the world of Family Guy is impermanent. This is worth saying plainly before anything else because the impermanence is not consistent, and the inconsistency is the mystery. If every death in the show were temporary, if the show simply operated on the cartoon physics tradition where nothing is ever truly final, there would be no mystery. The form has established its own rules, the audience enters into the contract, and consequence-free cartoon physics creates its own kind of comedy. Family Guy inherits this tradition. But Family Guy also regularly presents death with emotional weight. It asks the audience to feel the loss. It invests in grief in specific episodes, it slows down, it clears space. It lets the sadness of a character's death be present in a way that the surrounding comedy makes room for. It does this sincerely, and then, sometimes, it reverses the death. And sometimes it does not. And the mechanism governing which deaths get reversed and which deaths stick is never explained, which means the audience is left in a permanently uncertain relationship with what any given loss in this show actually means. Some deaths stick. Diane Simmons, shot by Stewie in the Season 9 premiere, does not come back. Adam West's character was retired from the show following the death of the real Adam West, and the retirement was handled with genuine care. The show acknowledged the loss within its own universe, gave the character's death the weight of a real community loss, and did not replace the mayor with a different version voiced by a different person. He was simply gone. Muriel Goldman, the pharmacist's wife who had been a recurring presence in the show's background since early seasons, dies in a time travel episode and does not come back. The pharmacist continues without her. Her absence is permanent. Brian Griffin died and came back. This is the most famous and most controversial death in the show's history. The one that generated national news coverage and trended on social media for days when it aired in November 2013. In the episode Life of Brian, Brian was hit by a car on Spooner Street. He was taken to the veterinarian. He died. The family grieved. Stewie, who had lost the interdimensional travel device that would have allowed him to prevent the death, was devastated in a way that the show rendered with genuine emotional force. The family adopted a new dog named Vinny, a New York Italian dog who was different from Brian in every way. The show committed to this new reality for 2 episodes. And then, in Christmas Guy, Stewie encountered a future version of himself who had a working time travel device, acquired it, and went back to prevent Brian from being in the street when the car came. Brian came back. Everything returned to what it was before. The internet's response to the reversal was, in significant part, anger. Not because the audience did not want Brian back, they did want Brian back, but because of what the reversal revealed about what the death had been. The speed of the reversal, the completeness of it, the way the show essentially continued as though the 2 episodes of grief and the new dog had not happened. All of this communicated clearly that the death was never intended as a permanent narrative decision. It was a ratings event, a shocking moment designed to generate attention and viewer engagement, intended from the beginning to be undone before it could have any lasting consequence. But within the show's own logic, within the fiction where these are real events in real characters' lives, something more complicated is true. Brian died. Stewie went back in time and prevented the death. The timeline in which Brian died and the family grieved, and Vinny arrived and 2 episodes of a different version of Spooner Street played out, that timeline still exists. The show's own established mechanics of time travel mean that Stewie's intervention created a new branch, rather than erasing the original. The original timeline in which Brian Griffin is dead continues to exist in the show's universe. It is simply not the timeline the show is currently set in. The Brian we watch in episodes after Christmas Guy is the Brian of the revised timeline, the one Stewie's intervention created. He is alive because Stewie reached across the logic of causality and pulled him out of the version of events where he was not. And this Brian knows this. He was told. He knows there is a version of his life in which he died on that street. He knows there is a version in which the family grieved and got another dog and continued without him. He knows that his current existence is the product of an intervention made by a 1-year-old baby who loves him enough to break temporal causality rather than accept the loss. The inconsistency between which deaths stick and which do not is the show's most honest disclosure of how it thinks about its own characters. The characters whose deaths stick are the characters who the show has decided can be lost, characters whose function in the narrative can be absorbed by others, characters who are valued but whose absence does not fundamentally change the show's structure. The characters whose deaths are reversed are structural elements rather than furniture. Brian is reversed because Family Guy without Brian is not Family Guy. Adam West is not reversed because the character can be replaced without the show losing its identity. The episode And Then There Were Fewer presents the starkest example of the show's relationship with the aftermath of death. Multiple characters are murdered on an island during a dinner party, real members of the show's recurring community, people who have been part of the background of this town's life across seasons. Joe Swanson, as a police officer, investigates. The murder mystery is resolved, and the world of the show continues in subsequent episodes without any apparent adjustment to the fact that people who were alive before the episode are now dead. Their absence does not ripple. The bar is still open. The community continues. The landscape of the show does not change. This is the most consistently strange feature of death in Family Guy's universe. Not that the deaths do not stick, but that when they do stick, the world continues without rearranging itself around the absence. It absorbs the loss without changing shape. Something or someone is maintaining the stability of this world against the natural tendency of loss to leave marks. Something is keeping the world of Family Guy identical to itself regardless of what happens in it. The characters die, or come back from death, or choose not to die in the first place, and the town remains. The drunken clam remains. The Griffin house remains. The show remains itself, season after season, adjusting for changes in animation style and character detail, while somehow remaining, in its essence, the same show it was in 1999. What is maintaining that? The show has never said. But the consistency of it, the way even genuine losses fail to fundamentally change the landscape, suggests something deliberate. Some mechanism whose function is to keep the story running regardless of what the story does to itself. Season after season, the world persisting with the strange resilience of something that has been built to last. Number. Section 8. The Multiverse Question. Which Family Guy is real? In September of 2009, in the first episode of the show's 8th season, Stewie Griffin explains the multiverse theory to Brian. He explains it with the pleasure of someone who has been waiting to say it out loud to someone who will appreciate the scope of it. The theory, he says, holds that there are infinite universes coexisting with their own, sitting adjacent on parallel dimensional planes, each one a version of reality in which some variable is different from the others. Sometimes the difference is minor, a name changed, a road taken differently, a moment that went left instead of right. Sometimes the difference is radical, a reality so far from the primary one that the two barely share recognizable features. And every possible version of every possible event exists somewhere, in some branch of the infinite structure of what is real. Then he produces a remote control that navigates between them. The episode that follows, Road to the Multiverse, is widely and fairly regarded as one of the finest things the show ever produced. It earns this reputation through the completeness of its commitment to its own premise. Stewie and Brian travel across realities, a universe where Christianity never existed and human scientific development is consequently 1,000 years ahead of where it is in the primary reality. A Flintstones universe where everyone speaks in rock-based idioms. A Japan-dominated America where the United States never used the atomic bomb. A Disney universe? gorgeous and hand-drawn animation, and with the specific darkness underneath the beauty that any honest assessment of Disney's world would acknowledge. A Robot Chicken universe, in stop motion, where Seth Green appears both as voice and as character. The Real World, rendered in live action, where the real world immediately kills one of them. The episode is inventive, committed, funny, and for the purposes of the mystery we are examining tonight, permanently consequential for what it does to the show's broader mythology. Because once the multiverse is established as real within Family Guy's universe, not as metaphor, not as a one-episode conceit, but as a literal feature of physical reality that Stewie has a device for navigating, it changes what you are watching every time you watch any subsequent episode. The question that cannot be avoided from this point onward is which one of these infinite realities the show is currently in. The show's floating timeline is the first thing this question illuminates differently. The practice of setting each episode in what appears to be the current year, regardless of when the episode was produced, meaning the characters do not age, the world around them is perpetually contemporary, references to current events are current to the episode, rather than to any fixed point in the show's internal history, is typically explained as a production convenience, a decision not to be bound by real time. This is a reasonable explanation from outside the show. From inside the show, from within the fiction where the multiverse is real, the floating timeline looks different. It looks like the signature of a reality that has been modified. A universe in which the characters do not age, in which time does not accumulate in the usual way, in which the rules about what is permanent and what can be changed are inconsistent in ways that no natural universe would be inconsistent. This is a universe that has been adjusted, that has been altered from outside, that is operating under parameters that were imposed rather than arising naturally from the world's own physics. The post-cancellation revival theory engages with this directly. Family Guy ended in 2002. The show that returned in 2005 changed in animation style, changed in character dynamics, subtly but unmistakably different in its tone and in the emotional texture of its fictional world is not, by this theory, the same show. The cancellation in 2002 was the end of One Reality's version of Family Guy. The version that continued, the one where Adult Swim reruns happened, where DVD sales happened, where Fox reconsidered and made the call to bring it back, is a different universe. The show we have been watching from 2005 onward is the parallel version. The characters are the same people in all the ways that matter for continuing the story, but they are different people in the ways that account for what changed. The theory is elegant because it sidesteps the debate about whether the changes between early and late Family Guy represent creative failure or creative evolution. In this reading, both things are simultaneously true. The original Family Guy seasons 1 through 3, the show that ran from 1999 to 2002, was what it was. The post-revival Family Guy seasons 4 onward, the show that has been running since 2005, is what it is. They are different shows because they are different universes. Adjacent, overlapping, sharing almost all of their history, but branching at the moment of the first cancellation into two different versions of what happened next. The multiverse also recontextualizes every death in the show's history. Brian died in the original timeline. Stewie's intervention created a new timeline in which Brian did not die. Both timelines are real, coexisting in the show's own established physics. The Brian we are watching now is the Brian of the revised timeline alive because of Stewie's love and Stewie's willingness to break causality rather than accept the loss. The Brian of the original timeline, who was hit by a car on Spooner Street in November 2013 and died, is also real, is also out there somewhere in the infinite structure of what is possible. In some adjacent reality, Vinny the dog is still on Spooner Street. In some adjacent reality, the family is still carrying the grief of losing the dog they had for all those years. The show confirmed this is true, through its own logic, and then continued, as though the confirmation had no implications. As though establishing that a grieving version of the Griffin family exists just one universe over changes nothing about the show's forward momentum. The primary reality continues. The revised version of Brian is alive. The story goes on. The chicken fights exist somewhere in this multiverse framework, and they deserve a moment of sustained attention. The recurring sequences in which Peter and a giant anthropomorphic chicken, his name is Ernie, he has a wife and a domestic life, the show has confirmed these details engage in combat that is elaborate, sustained, orchestrated with specific attention to choreography and scale. and that neither of them can ever conclusively win. The original cause is an expired coupon. This is the show's comedy explanation, and it functions as one. But the fights themselves have a quality distinct from the surrounding comedy. They are extended and operatic. They follow consistent internal rules across all their appearances. They end always, with both parties battered and exhausted and alive and then separating to return to their regular lives. Neither of them ever explains to anyone what just happened or appears to have the vocabulary to explain it. In what kind of universe does a working-class man from Rhode Island keep fighting a giant chicken to a draw across decades without conclusion? In the kind of universe where certain things have been designated as ongoing, where certain conflicts have been built into the structure of the reality rather than existing as events within it. The chicken fight is not something that happens to Peter, it is something that Peter is. It is part of the configuration of his reality in the same way that the show's floating timeline is part of the configuration maintained from outside, persisting regardless of what else changes, permanent, in a way that the events around it are not. Every possible universe exists, Stewie said. In one of those universes, Peter and Ernie never fought. In another, one of them won, and the fight is over. In the universe the show is currently set in, they fight, and they fight, and they fight, and the town continues around them. And the beer is cold at the bar, and the house is still on Spooner Street, and none of it has ended yet. Number. Section 9, Lois Griffin's Secret Life. The Pewter Schmidt Darkness. Lois Griffin appears, at first encounter and for a long time afterward, to be the most legible character in the show. She is the wife, the mother, the anchor. She is the voice of patience when patience is needed, and the voice of sanity when sanity has fled the building, which, in the Griffin household, happens with some regularity. She plays piano. She cooks. She maintains the household against the persistent entropy of Peter's decision-making. She is, across the early seasons, the character who most clearly grounds the show's emotional reality, whose responses to the chaos around her give the audience a measurement for how seriously to take what is happening. She is the fixed point. But Lois Griffin has a past. And the past of Lois Pewterschmidt, the name she carried before she became Lois Griffin, the name of the world she came from and chose to leave, is one of the show's most carefully maintained and least resolved mysteries. Because the world Lois came from was not simple. It was not the gentle, upper-class background that the show occasionally uses as a straightforward contrast with Peter's working-class environment. It was something stranger and darker and more carefully managed, and the choice Lois made to leave it was more specific than the show usually gives it credit for being. Begin with her father. Carter Pewterschmidt is one of the wealthiest men in Rhode Island, and, by the scale of what the show has attributed to him, one of the more economically powerful private individuals in the United States. He owns U.S. Steel and Pewterschmidt Industries. He is portrayed as a conservative billionaire of the most nakedly self-interested variety, a man who believes that money is the appropriate metric for all human value, who treats other people as resources or obstacles depending on their utility to his objectives, and who has the kind of absolute confidence in his own judgment that comes from spending decades in an environment where his judgment was almost never successfully challenged. He keeps a rancor beneath his mansion. This is a Star Wars reference, yes, but the joke works on the assumption that Carter Pewterschmidt is the kind of man who would keep an enormous predatory creature in a pit under his house. The creature is there. It presumably serves a function. Carter has not explained the function, and the show has not pressed him to explain it. Carter has never liked Peter Griffin. He has disliked Peter since Lois first brought him home, and he has continued to dislike Peter across 25 years of episodes in which Peter has been a regular presence in his life as a son-in-law. The show frames this as class snobbery, the aristocrat refusing the working-class man. There is genuinely snobbery in it, but Carter's investment in keeping Peter out of Lois's life goes beyond what snobbery alone would motivate. He offered Peter $1 million not to marry Lois. Not as a gesture, not as a test, as a serious financial offer. $1 million to walk away. He wanted Peter gone with the kind of specificity and intensity that requires more than social prejudice to explain. Why does Carter care this much? The show has not provided a clear answer. Peter is, in Carter's framing, beneath Lois. But Carter has a daughter named Carol who has been married 9 times. And the show has never depicted Carter mounting a sustained campaign against Carol's choices, the way he has mounted one against Lois's. The intensity of the opposition to Peter specifically suggests something beyond general class prejudice. It suggests that Carter has a reason, a specific, particular reason to want Peter out of the picture. A reason that has to do with what Peter represents in Lois's life rather than simply with what Peter is. What does Peter represent in Lois's life? The show's answer is love. She loves him. She chose him. This is true, and the show has made it sincerely true across many episodes. But there is another answer, one that Carter would see more clearly than anyone else, because Carter understands his own household better than anyone. Peter represents a witness, a person who entered Lois's life from outside the Pewterschmidt world, who was not conditioned by Carter's version of reality, who has no reason to maintain Carter's version of what the family is. Carter cannot control Peter the way he can control people who grew up inside the architecture of Pewterschmidt wealth and expectation. Peter is outside the system, and Carter has built his entire life around the management of a system. Patrick Pewterschmidt illuminates this more clearly than anything else the show has revealed about the family. He is introduced in the episode The Fat Guy Strangler. Lois discovers for the first time that she has an older brother. Patrick has been institutionalized in the Brookfield Insane Asylum for 30 years, his existence kept completely secret from Lois by Carter. The stated reason for his original commitment is that as a young man, Patrick walked in on his mother performing a sexual act with the entertainer Jackie Gleason, and the experience caused him to break down. He developed a fixation on fat men as the source of all evil. He became, upon a temporary release from the institution, a serial killer who targeted overweight men. Carter kept Patrick's existence secret from Lois for 30 years, 3 full decades. Lois grew up in the Pewterschmidt household believing she had one sibling, her sister Carol, and never knowing that her brother was alive and suffering and existing in an institution that her father was managing from a distance. Carter made this decision. He maintained it. For 30 years he managed the fact of a son. He had locked away the paperwork, the payments, the continuing reality of Patrick's existence, while presenting Lois with a version of the family that did not include him. What does a man hide that carefully? The practical answer is that Patrick in the institution is a problem managed. Patrick known to Lois is a problem complicated by her feelings, by the question of what happens now, by the vulnerability of a long-held secret being exposed. But the decision to conceal him in the first place required Carter to look at his own son and decide that the son's existence was less important than the version of the family Carter was presenting. He weighed his child against the image he was maintaining, and the image won. This is the man who raised Lois. Not a villain in the cartoon sense that the show sometimes renders him. Something more specific and more disturbing. A person who applies enormous resources and genuine intelligence to the project of maintaining a particular version of reality, and who removes from that version anything that does not fit. Patrick did not fit. Patrick was removed. The nanny who had an affair with Carter, revealed in the episode Pewterschmidt Manor, did not fit the household's version of itself. The nanny was dismissed. Peter does not fit Carter's version of what Lois's life should be. Carter has spent 25 years trying to make Peter stop fitting. Lois was raised inside this version of reality. She was shaped by a household where things disappeared when they did not serve the image, where her father's authority over the family's narrative was complete, where she had a brother she did not know existed, where the warmth she received came from a nanny who was having an affair with the man who was supposed to be the head of the household, where everything that was true was, in some part, managed. And then she married Peter and moved to Spooner Street. This choice, which the show treats as the premise for its comedy, the wealthy woman with the working-class husband, the glamorous background with the modest present, was not simply love, it was escape. She married someone her father specifically and expensively tried to prevent her from marrying. She moved into a house that was not on Carter's map, that was not part of his system, that was too small and too unglamorous and too genuinely ordinary to be a useful arena for the kind of management Carter practiced. She built a life that was specifically positioned outside the architecture of control that the Pewterschmidt world represented. The strategy worked in some ways and did not work in others. Carter is still present. He still interferes. He still opposes. But he cannot control Spooner Street the way he could control Newport. He cannot manage the Griffin household the way he managed the Pewterschmidt household, because Peter, whatever his many failures, is genuinely ungovernable in a way that Carter has never been able to account for. What Lois brought with her to Spooner Street, the thing she could not leave behind, was the knowledge. The 30 years of a brother hidden in an asylum. The nanny dismissed for an affair with her father. The $1 million offered to prevent her marriage. Whatever else the Pewterschmidt household contained that the show has not revealed. She carries all of this. She has always carried it. And the warmth of early Lois, the genuine patience, the real care, the quality of someone who has chosen something and means the choice gradually gives way, across the seasons, to a cooler and more detached version of the same person. Not because she has stopped caring, because the weight of what she is carrying has accumulated across the years, and the life she chose, which was supposed to be the alternative to what she came from, has its own complications and its own disappointments. The distance between the life she chose and the life she was trained to want has not gotten easier to maintain just because she has maintained it for a long time. She is still there, still on Spooner Street, still playing piano in the living room. Whatever she originally intended for herself before Peter, before the children, before the years of choosing this life over the other one, she has not said. The show has never given her a scene in which she says it directly and has it heard. The Pewterschmidt darkness is not dramatic. It is not sudden. It is the kind of darkness that accumulates quietly over years in a household that has decided that the image matters more than the truth. Lois grew up in it, she escaped it, and she brought enough of it with her that the escape was never quite complete. Number. Section 10. The town itself. What is this place hiding? The town is called Quahog, pronounced Quahog, named for the edible clam native to the northeastern coast of the United States. It is located in Newport County, Rhode Island. Its zip code, revealed in the episode Foxy Lady, is 00093. No real Rhode Island zip code begins with 3 zeros. This is not a clerical error in the show's production. It is a number that does not correspond to any location in the real postal geography of the United States. The town's zip code is a number that exists nowhere. The town's population has been given in the episode Tom Tucker, the Man and His Dream, as 800 people. 800. A number that would describe a village. A number that would not support a functioning post office, let alone the infrastructure the show has shown this town to contain. The town also has a functioning international airport, multiple hospitals, a university district in which multiple institutions of higher education apparently operate, a commercial harbor with genuine shipping capacity, a news station, Channel 5 News, with full production capabilities and 2 veteran anchor personalities, and a weatherman and a sports reporter. A police department substantial enough that Joe Swanson has had a career in it spanning decades, a civic arena, a city hall with a genuine mayor's office, a mall, a bowling alley, multiple bars and restaurants and shops, and the full commercial infrastructure of a mid-sized American city. 800 people cannot generate the tax base required for any of this. 800 people are not a city, they are a village. The arithmetic does not work, and the show has never addressed the arithmetic because addressing it would require acknowledging that the arithmetic is not supposed to work. The 8 to 100 figure and the infrastructure figure are not in the same reality. They are presented simultaneously, in the same fictional universe, as both true, which means that either one of them is wrong or the nature of the town's reality is different from what it appears to be. The geographic position of the town is equally resistant to coherence. The episode E, Peterbus Unum, presents a map of Rhode Island with the town's location marked, placing it in the vicinity of Tiverton, a small town on the eastern edge of the state near the Massachusetts border. The show's creator, Seth MacFarlane, has stated in an interview that the town is modeled on Cranston, which is on the opposite side of the state, a suburb of Providence to the southwest. The Providence skyline is visible behind the Griffin House in establishing shots across many episodes. The order of those buildings relative to each other suggests, to careful viewers who have cross-referenced the real Providence geography, that the town is northwest of Providence in some shots and south of Providence in others, depending on the episode. The town moves, not in any way that its inhabitants have ever noticed or commented on, but its position in the geography of Rhode Island is inconsistent across episodes in a way that goes beyond simple production error. The geography shifts to serve whatever a given episode requires. The town is coastal when the story needs a coast. It is suburban when the story needs a suburb. It is close to Providence when Providence is relevant to the plot. It does not have a fixed location. It has a variable location that is always exactly where it needs to be. The show's own founding myth for the town is worth sitting with carefully. According to the episode Peter's Progress, The town was established in the 17th century by Griffin Peterson, an ancestor of Peter Griffin, who was exiled from England by King Stewart III. Peterson was on his way to marry a woman named Lady Redbush. King Stewart, who wanted Lady Redbush for himself, had Peterson banished to the New World, told Lady Redbush that Peterson was dead, and married her. Peterson arrived in what would become Rhode Island, accompanied by a group of fellow exiles, people who had been punished and expelled for various offenses, none of which were enough to earn them execution, but all of which were enough to earn them removal from the society that had produced them. And this group of expelled people established the colony on the coast of a place that had no official existence in the terms that the people who sent them away would have recognized. This town was founded by the unwanted, for the unwanted, in a place that did not officially exist until they made it exist. This is the show's own mythology about its own setting, and it is remarkably honest about what kind of place this is and what kinds of people it was built for. Every major character in Family Guy is, in one way or another, someone who does not quite fit the world that surrounds them. Peter is too large, too crude, too fundamentally incompatible with the social expectations that the world around him keeps presenting. Lois is a Pewterschmidt who gave up the world that would have accommodated her for the one she chose. Brian should not be possible in the world he inhabits. Stewie is a baby who contains multitudes that no infant was ever meant to contain. Quagmire operates outside the ethical structures of his community. Joe lives with a disability in a world that does not always make room for disabled people with grace. Meg is a girl whom the world has decided is not worth including. All of them are here, in a town built by exiles, on a coast that moves depending on what you need from it, at zip code 00093, which is nowhere. The Drunken Clam has a quality in the show that goes beyond being a setting. It is the most persistent location in the show's universe. The bar has been destroyed and rebuilt, has been sold and reacquired, has changed and continued, and has always been there when the characters needed it. The same is true of the Griffin House. These two locations, the bar and the house, are the fixed points of a geography that will not stay still. Everything else in the town shifts and contradicts and cannot be definitively located. These two things remain. There is something in the founding myth worth returning to. Griffin Peterson arrived in Rhode Island and established a colony for people who had been expelled from the places they came from. The founding principle was accommodation of the unwanted. The town has been built on that principle since its beginning, and every character the show has placed in it is, in their own way, someone who needed to be accommodated. Someone the broader world did not quite have a place for. The town holds them. The geography shifts around them. The infrastructure defies the population count. The zip code points to nowhere. And they are still there, in the place that has no fixed location, in the numbers that do not add up, in the nowhere that has always been exactly where they needed it to be. Number. Section 11. The cutaway dimension. Are the gags actually real? The show cuts away. It has always done this. From the very first episode, Death Has a Shadow, the 31st of January 1999, and it has never stopped. A character is mid-conversation, and then the picture changes, the setting changes, the music changes. We are watching something else entirely. A different scene, involving different people, at a different time and in a different place, disconnected from whatever was happening in the main storyline. The gag plays out sometimes briefly, in a few seconds, sometimes at considerable length, and then the show returns to the main storyline as though nothing has been interrupted, as though the crosscut was not a crosscut but simply the way time works in this world. This is the cutaway gag. It is the most recognizable feature of Family Guy's comedy and the element that has defined its reputation more thoroughly than anything else. It is what people describe when they try to explain to someone who has not seen the show what the show is like. It is also, if you take the show's universe seriously for a moment and ask the question with genuine curiosity, one of the most genuinely mysterious elements in the show's reality. What are these scenes? Not as a production choice, not as a structural comedy device, not as a mechanism for packing extra jokes into 22 minutes of animation, but within the fiction itself, within the world where Peter and Lois and Brian and Stewie are real people leading real lives in a real Rhode Island coastal town. What, exactly, is happening when the picture cuts away? The simplest reading is that the cutaways are dramatizations of characters' memories or imaginations. Peter says something reminds him of another time, and the show renders that other time visually, the way a conventional drama might use a flashback, except faster, more absurd, less invested in the internal logic of memory as a medium. This reading works for some of the cutaways. It works for the ones that involve Peter describing something he has personally experienced. It fails for the substantial portion of cutaways that depict events that no character in the scene could have a memory of. Historical events from centuries before any character was born. Scenes happening simultaneously in other locations with no witnesses present. Interactions between public figures that no member of the Griffin family could plausibly have attended. Private moments between strangers that have no connection to anyone in the show's main cast. These cutaways are not memories, they are access. The show is gaining access to scenes that exist outside the experience of the characters who appear to be triggering them. It is displaying these scenes as though accessing them were entirely ordinary. The mechanism by which this access is obtained is never explained. 3 frameworks for what the cutaways actually are, in the show's own fiction. First, if Brian is the author of Family Guy, then the cutaways are Brian's digressions. They are the associative leaps of a writer's mind during composition, the moments when the narrative thread being followed suggests something related, and the writer's attention follows the suggestion sideways into territory. That does not directly serve the plot, but that feels important to include. The historical cutaways are Brian incorporating research into the text. The cutaways showing scenes with no witnesses are Brian imagining what must have happened based on what he knows, filling the gaps between witnessed reality and comprehensive narrative. The cutaways that seem completely unrelated to anything are Brian following a thought until it stops being useful, and including the dead-end thought in the text anyway because the thought was interesting, even if the destination was not. In this reading, the Conway-Twitty gags are Brian's writer's block made visible. Brian, unable to continue the story, inserts the music that was playing in the room while he sat at the desk and failed to find the next sentence. The novel continuing despite itself, its pages filling with sound because the author had no words for them. This is the most honest thing in the show, in this reading. The author admitting, through the insertion of an unedited country music performance, that he has nothing, that the work has stalled, that the next page is not coming. Second, if the show takes place inside Peter's mind, if the world of Family Guy is a fantasy generated to accommodate a grief that cannot be accommodated in any other way, then the cutaways are the way a traumatized consciousness fails to maintain narrative coherence. Peter's mind is trying to sustain a story about a family that is still intact, still present, still together. But consciousness under pressure does not sustain narrative coherence well. It fragments. It generates associations with no logical connection to the main thread. It jumps from one image to another with the logic of pain rather than the logic of sequence. In this reading, the cutaways are symptoms. They are the fractures in the story that Peter is telling himself, moments when the fantasy loses its internal logic and the underlying chaos of the mind generating it shows through. The more frequent and the more disconnected the cutaways become across the seasons, the more clearly the pressure is showing. The fantasy is harder to sustain as time passes. The fractures appear more often. The story is holding, but not as easily as it once held. Third, if the multiverse is real and the show established in Season 8 that it is, then the cutaways are windows. Brief openings into adjacent realities, triggered by something in the current scene that creates a resonance with the parallel universe where the thing being referenced actually happened. Peter says something is worse than a time a specific thing occurred. The cutaway shows that thing occurring, but it is not his memory of that time. It is that time happening in a parallel universe where the conditions were exactly right for it to occur, becoming briefly visible through the membrane between realities. In this reading, the Conway-Twitty gags are the most interesting of all the cutaways, and they deserve more attention than comedy criticism has typically given them. If the cutaways are windows into adjacent universes, then the Conway-Twitty gag is a window into a universe where the only thing happening is Conway-Twitty performing his song. No Griffin family, no chaos, no plot, no violence or absurdity or shock. Just a man and his music in a room where nothing else is going on. In a show built on noise and interruption and the relentless presence of something happening, something demanding attention, something requiring response, something generating comedy or horror or both simultaneously. The Conway-Twitty gag produces the most complete stillness the show has ever achieved. The audience sits with it. The music plays. The cutaway continues past the point where a punchline would normally arrive, past the point of comfort, into something that is either lazy or profound depending on how you approach it. If it is a window into a universe where the only thing is the music, then the show, through its most derided gag, is pointing at something worth pointing at. A universe where the noise has stopped, where there is no dysfunction to manage, no chaos to endure, no family to absorb the impact of, where something is simply happening, unhurried, complete in itself, not requiring anything from the people listening to it, a universe of pure sound and stillness. In a show that is otherwise relentless, that may be the most disturbing thing it has ever shown us. That such a universe exists, adjacent to all the noise, accessible if you just know how to tune in. That somewhere, just sideways from everything the show normally is, there is only music. And the show keeps pointing at it, and the audience keeps being uncomfortable, and nobody quite says what they are pointing at. Perhaps they cannot. Perhaps the words for it are in a universe the cutaway has not yet reached. Number, Section 12. The simulation question. Is any of this actually happening? We come at last to the deepest question. The one that all the other questions have been circling without quite arriving at. The one that sits underneath every mystery we have examined tonight, like the foundation under a house, structural, weight-bearing, rarely seen, always there. Is any of this actually happening? This is not a fringe question in the Family Guy fan community. It is one of the most developed areas of the show's theoretical landscape, and it occupies that position because the show has provided, across its run, genuine evidence for taking it seriously. Not proof. The show will never provide conclusive proof, because providing conclusive proof would require the show to become something other than what it appears to be, and that is not the kind of show this is. But evidence. Consistent, recurring, accumulating evidence that the nature of the reality we are watching may be fundamentally different from what the show presents on its surface. The first major theory of the show's fundamental unreality is also its most emotionally resonant. It proposes that the world of Family Guy exists inside the mind of Peter Griffin. That everything, every episode, every scene, every character, every moment of comedy and chaos and occasional tenderness is a fantasy. A constructed reality that Peter's consciousness is generating in response to losses in his actual life that he cannot survive any other way. The real world, in this theory, looks like this. Meg is beautiful and popular, the kind of girl that her high school notices and includes and celebrates. Chris has an intellectual disability, not enough oxygen at birth, a detail that has shaped his entire life and his family's relationship to him. One night, at a party, Meg drives home with Chris in the car because she is trying to protect him from a situation that has become unsafe. She has drunk too much herself. The car crashes. Both Meg and Chris are killed. Lois, in her grief, the kind of grief that makes the continuation of ordinary life feel not just difficult but impossible, takes her own life while pregnant with Stewie. Stewie is never born. Peter survives. The question of whether Peter himself survives is answered by the world he constructs inside his mind. In the fantasy, they are all still there. Meg is present but invisible, not the beautiful, popular girl she was in reality, because making her beautiful and popular in the fantasy would make her too close to the real person who is gone. Making her beautiful would mean looking at beauty and thinking of loss, so she is made invisible instead, made ordinary and overlooked and easy to ignore. The cruelty directed at her in the fantasy, which so many viewers have found difficult to watch, is not cruelty in this reading. It is the only way Peter can have her in the room without being destroyed by having her in the room. He has to make her someone he does not love perfectly, or the grief would be unbearable. Chris is there, and he is fine, oblivious, awkward, fundamentally okay because the version of Chris in the fantasy does not have the disability that put him in the car. The thing that made Chris vulnerable, that led to the night of the party, that put him in the situation Meg was trying to protect him from this thing, does not exist in the fantasy. It is the one thing Peter most needed to change. Lois is there, patient and warm and forgiving, but she is a reconstruction. She is built from Peter's memory of Lois rather than from Lois herself. She is the version of Lois that Peter most needed her to be, the one who keeps forgiving him, the one who keeps trying, the one who does not leave. In the real world, Lois left in the worst possible way. In the fantasy, she never leaves. Stewie, the baby who was never born, who was still inside Lois when she died, who never had a chance to be anything, is who Peter imagines his youngest child might have become. The most extraordinary being he can construct. Brilliant beyond measure, complicated beyond comprehension, capable of love so fierce it reaches backward through time. Stewie is the child Peter never met. He is built from everything Peter hoped a child could be, elevated to something that cannot exist in the real world. Because real children always come with limitations that the loved children in a grieving parent's mind do not. Peter makes himself less capable in the fantasy because he believes somewhere in the part of his mind that the fantasy cannot fully reach, that his own failures contributed to what happened. He was oblivious. He did not notice things. He did not protect them the way he should have. He is not capable, in the fantasy, of being the smart one because the smart one should have prevented this. So he puts his intelligence elsewhere. He puts it into the dog Brian, who is warm and present, and the part of the real world that kept visiting him after everything ended, who understood something about his grief without being able to name it, who sat with him in whatever room he was in, who stayed. Cleveland and Joe and Quagmire come to see him. In reality, they visit, they sit with him, they talk. In the fantasy, they are exaggerations of themselves, louder, stranger, more defined by their single most visible qualities because memory and grief simplify the people we love. The friends who visit become, in the fantasy, the versions of themselves that were easiest to hold. The show's inability to allow permanent change the way nothing sticks, the way lessons are forgotten and situations recur and deaths are reversed and the same problems keep reappearing is not, in this reading, a creative failure. It is the nature of a mind in distress trying to maintain a story it cannot finish. The story must always return to the same place, because the place is a moment in time, the moment before the crash, the moment when the family was still intact. The story keeps circling back to that moment, because that is where Peter needs to be, where the fantasy is trying to hold him, as close as possible to the last moment when everything was still all right. The second major theory of the show's fundamental unreality is cooler and more structurally precise. It does not require grief or trauma or a man in a hospital room somewhere. It simply requires the technology that the show's own universe has already confirmed exists, and the assumption that this technology has been used in the way the show's organization has previously demonstrated it uses. Technology? The CIA in American Dad creates simulations of reality. It has done this on screen. It has created domestic environments indistinguishable from the real world, maintained for observation or experimental purposes, running with enough fidelity that subjects inside them experience the simulation as their actual lives. This technology is established canon in the same fictional universe as Family Guy, and the theory simply extends the established canon. The Griffin household is one of these simulations. Peter Griffin is a subject. Spooner Street is a constructed environment. The observation has been running for 25 years. Every feature of the show's reality that does not make sense from inside the show makes sense from outside it. In this reading, the impossible geography, the zip code that is nowhere, the population that does not match the infrastructure, the address that was not on any map until the episode forced its formalization, is the signature of a rendered environment. The floating timeline is the simulation being updated to the current year without aging the subjects, because the aging process is unnecessary to the experiment and would complicate the data. The inconsistencies in the characters' histories are the kind of inconsistencies that arise when a simulation has to fill in details. It does not have the real-world data to populate accurately gaps in the rendering where the system had to guess. The moments when characters break the fourth wall, when they look into the camera, when they acknowledge that they are on a show, when they make references to the writers or the network or the nature of their own existence as fictional constructs are, in this reading, the most significant moments in the entire show. They are not comedy devices. They are failures of the simulation. The rendering briefly showing its seams, the subject's perception catching a glimpse of the framework rather than the world the framework is generating. Peter looks into the camera and makes a joke. The joke is the recovery the way his mind, or the simulation, or whatever is generating the experience he is having, processes the moment of seeing the machinery and converts it into something manageable. A joke is what you make when you have just seen something that should not be seeable and you need to move on from it without acknowledging what you saw. He knows something is watching. He gets close to knowing in those moments. And then the show continues, and the beer is still cold, and the house is still there, and the next scene begins as though the glimpse never happened. The deepest truth that either of these theories points at, or that both of them point at together, is that the show has been honest, in its strange and indirect way, about the nature of the world it is depicting. Whether that world is a grieving man's fantasy, or a government simulation, or something else entirely that neither theory fully captures, the show has told us something true about it through all of its inconsistencies. The truth is that the world is maintained, that something is keeping it stable, that the rules of natural reality, time, consequence, death, location, age, do not apply here in the way they apply outside. That there is a mechanism, unseen, that has decided this specific version of this specific family on this specific street will continue to exist in this specific configuration for as long as the mechanism continues to operate. And the mechanism has been operating for 25 years. It will continue. The deal has been made through season 27, through the 30th anniversary. The show will continue because something has decided the show will continue. And the reason, whether it is grief or observation, or something else entirely, is not something the show will ever disclose directly. It will simply keep running. The house will stay on Spooner Street, the bar will stay open, Peter will sit in his chair. Lois will play the piano in the other room. Meg will wait, patiently, for whatever she is waiting for. Stewie will keep his time machine in the nursery. Brian will carry his interior life quietly, the way writers carry the work that is not yet on the page. Quagmire will remain at 29. Joe will remain next door, the man the neighborhood once looked up to, still present, still sitting at the same table. And the town will stay wherever it needs to be. The zip code will continue to point to nowhere. The population will continue to be 800 people in a city built for 100,000. The horizon will continue to show a skyline that shifts depending on which angle you look from. The founding myth will continue to be true. This is a place for people who did not fit anywhere else, for the exiled and the unaccounted for, and the ungovernable, and the ones who fell through the gaps between what is documented and what is real. They are still there, in the gap between what is official and what is actual, in the space that was not on any map until someone needed it, in the nowhere that has always been exactly where it needed to be, for the people who ended up in it. The show will keep running. The questions will keep sitting at the bottom of the water, visible and unreachable. The mysteries will keep breathing in the dark between the comedy, patient as Meg in a hallway, waiting for whatever moment makes them matter. You are still watching. That is what watching this show means, if you watch it long enough with enough patience. You become one of the people in the room with the questions. You sit with them. You do not need them resolved. You just need to be in the room with them, in the dark, while the show keeps running. The founding exiles built a town in a place that did not officially exist. They called it after a clam. They made something out of a space that nothing else was using, and they held on to it. And all these years later, in a different country, in a different century, at a different kind of late hour, people are still sitting with the questions that came out of that invented place. The town that can't be located. The family that can't be assembled into a coherent whole. The baby with the lab in his nursery. The dog who should not be possible. The girl who is waiting. The mystery that keeps turning. Sleep well. The town is still there when you wake up. It always is. If you made it to the end of this, thank you. Genuinely. This is the kind of content that takes a long time to sit with and think through, and knowing that you are here for all of it, wherever in the world you are and whatever time it is, means more than I can properly say. Drop a comment with your location and the time. I read every single one, and I love knowing where this reaches. If you have not subscribed yet, please do. It is free, it costs you nothing, and it is how videos like this one keep finding people who want them. Like the video if it helped you drift somewhere comfortable and strange tonight, and I will see you in the next one. End of script. Number. Section 13. The Quahog News Station. A town that watches itself. Every fictional town in American television history has its own relationship with information. The way a community disseminates news, the way it talks about itself, the way the citizens of a fictional place learn what is happening to them. This is one of the quietest but most revealing elements of how a show understands the world it has built. Most shows treat their local news stations as background furniture, useful for plot mechanics and occasionally for comedy, but not particularly worthy of examination on their own terms. Family Guy is not most shows. Quahog Channel 5 News, with its anchor duo of Tom Tucker and Diane Simmons, later replaced by Joyce Kinney, its reporter Tricia Takanawa, and its weatherman and sports personality filling out the roster, is one of the most persistently strange elements of the show's universe. And the strangeness begins with a question that the show never asks directly, but that accumulates weight across episodes. Who is this news station actually for? The town's stated population is 800 people. A news station requires not just viewers but advertisers, and advertisers require the assurance of a market large enough to justify the investment. A full-production news station with anchors, reporters, a helicopter visible in various episodes, a weather apparatus, a dedicated sports coverage capacity, and what appears to be a fully functioning broadcast infrastructure requires the kind of economic base that 800 people simply cannot provide. The business model of Quahog Channel 5 News does not make sense if the town is the size the show says it is. Unless the station is not for the town, unless it is broadcasting to somewhere else, unless what appears to be a local news station is something more complex, a facility that has been placed in this specific location for reasons that have nothing to do with serving the informational needs of the 800 residents of a small Rhode Island coastal settlement. Tom Tucker is worth considering carefully in this context. He has been the primary face of Quahog Channel 5 News since the beginning of the show. He is professionally polished in the way that local news anchors are. Professionally polished, not quite at the level of national broadcast, but clearly trained, clearly practiced, clearly capable of reading with authority and maintaining composure through content that would unsettle a less disciplined presenter. He has a son with whom his relationship is consistently strained in ways the show treats as comedy. He has a romantic history that is occasionally referenced but never developed in any sustained way. He is, in summary, a man who has been at this desk for a very long time, in a town that should not require a desk of this quality, delivering news to a population that should not require this level of production. Why is Tom Tucker here? Not emotionally, not personally. Why is a man of his particular professional capacity stationed in a town of 800 people? The most obvious answer is that the show needs a news anchor for comedy purposes, and Tom Tucker fills that role. But within the show's fiction, within the world where Tom Tucker is a real person who made real career choices, this question does not resolve that easily. People of his apparent capability do not typically end up at small local stations without a reason. Either he made choices that brought him here, or circumstances brought him here, or something about this specific station made it preferable to the alternatives that someone with his skills would normally have access to. Diane Simmons, his original co-anchor, is even more interesting in this light. She was, before her death in the Season 9 premiere, a polished and capable broadcaster who harbored ambitions that the station was clearly not satisfying. She wanted more. She was better than the role she was in. And then Stewie shot her, which is a separate mystery we have already examined, but the trajectory of her character-talented person, under-satisfying position, escalating desperation traces a familiar arc. The arc of someone who ended up somewhere they did not intend to end up, who has been trying to work out how to leave for longer than they would admit. The news station watches everything. It covers the town's events, it broadcasts Peter's misadventures, the Griffin family's catastrophes, the community's ongoing life. It is the eye that never looks away. And in a town that may be a simulation, or a fantasy, or a reality maintained by an external mechanism, the presence of an apparatus specifically designed for watching and broadcasting everything that happens takes on a different quality, not just a local news station. The observation recording its own output. The simulation documenting itself from inside. Tom Tucker, reading the news in a town that should not need him, broadcasting to an audience that should not exist, every night from a desk that is much too professional for the location. He has been doing this since 1999. He has not left. He has not moved to a larger market, which someone of his ability should have been able to do. He is simply here, still reading, still broadcasting, still watching everything that happens and describing it back to the town in the calm, authoritative voice of someone who was trained to make everything sound like it makes sense. What does Tom Tucker know about this town? He has been watching it longer than almost anyone else the show has established as a long-term resident. He has been documenting it, episode after episode, catastrophe after catastrophe. He has a depth of institutional knowledge about this place that the show has never tapped and that the character has never shared in any direct way. What would Tom Tucker say about this town if someone asked him directly, off the record, away from the desk and the camera and the nightly broadcast? The show has never given him that scene. He sits at the desk, he reads the news, the camera light stays on. Number. Section 14. The Herbert Problem. What does the old man know? There is a character in Family Guy named Herbert who has lived on Spooner Street for the entire run of the show. He is elderly, speaks with a slow and breathy delivery, and moves with the careful deliberateness of someone whose body requires negotiation rather than simple command. He has a dog named Jesse who appears occasionally. He sits on his porch, he watches the neighborhood, he watches Chris Griffin specifically, with an attention that the show renders as comedy, and that has made Herbert one of the more controversial recurring characters in the series' history. What is genuinely interesting about Herbert, from a mystery standpoint, is not the content of his interest in Chris. The show is explicit about what it is portraying, and the comedy around it is the comedy of the uncomfortable and the taboo. What is genuinely interesting is what Herbert represents in the architecture of the show's universe. He is old. The show has never specified his age precisely, but he reads as genuinely elderly, not middle-aged, not the ambiguous age that most of the show's recurring characters occupy, but the specific age of someone who has been alive for a very long time and whose body is showing that duration. In a show where nobody ages, where the floating timeline prevents the accumulation of years in any visible way, Herbert's apparent age is a constant. He has always been this old. He was this old in 1999. He is this old now. He will presumably be this old for as long as the show continues. This means that Herbert, alone among the show's recurring characters, gives the viewer a stable point of reference for what age actually looks like in this universe. He shows that old age is possible here. That time has been operating on at least one person in this town in the normal way, accumulating and leaving its marks on the body. While Peter and Lois and the rest of the main cast remain frozen in their midlife configurations, Herbert sits on his porch and is visibly old. What does he remember? If Herbert has been old since 1999, and the show's floating timeline places each episode in the contemporary year, then Herbert has been sitting on that porch for a very long time watching a neighborhood that never changes. He has watched Peter remain 45 for a quarter of a century. He has watched Meg remain a teenager. He has watched the same rhythms of the same street repeat themselves year after year, with the specific quality of something that is not aging because it has been prevented from aging. Herbert sees this. He has been sitting on that porch long enough to see it. Whether the show has given him the capacity to articulate what he sees is a different question. He is rendered as a comedy character, which means the show's primary investment is in his function as a generator of uncomfortable humor, rather than as a character with an interior life the audience is supposed to engage with. But the interior life is there, in the negative space between his jokes. Somebody has been watching the street for 25 years while it remains unchanged, and that somebody has eyes that have been open for a very long time. What does Herbert know that nobody has ever asked him to say? Number. Section 15, The Joe Swanson Paradox. The hero who became the joke. Joe Swanson is introduced in the first season episode A Hero Sits Next Door as the new neighbor on Spooner Street. He is everything the episode's title suggests. A hero. He is a police officer. He uses a wheelchair injured on Christmas Eve, the show establishes, in a confrontation with the Grinch, which the show presents as comedy backstory, while the actual content of it is a man permanently injured in the line of doing something heroic. He is strong, capable, respected, and admired by the neighborhood to a degree that makes Peter Griffin jealous. That jealousy is the episode's central conflict. Peter wants what Joe has. Joe has something real, and Peter recognizes it even through his characteristic obliviousness. This is a remarkable introduction. Joe Swanson, in his first episode, is a figure of genuine dignity. His disability is part of his characterization. It is presented as the cost of something he chose to do, a mark of a life lived in service of something larger than himself, not a punchline. His wife Bonnie is warm and present. His position in the neighborhood is earned. The other residents of Spooner Street look at Joe and see something they respect. This is a man with a story that is, at its core, one of real integrity. Over the course of the show's run, this integrity is slowly and systematically dismantled. The process is gradual, as these things always are in Family Guy. The show does not decide all at once that Joe Swanson should be diminished. It happens incrementally, in small decisions that accumulate across seasons into something that, when you look at the arc of the character from beginning to present, is genuinely difficult to watch. His disability, which was a mark of heroism in the first season, becomes a source of mockery. His wife Bonnie, who was warm and supportive, becomes distant and unfaithful. His friendships with Peter, Cleveland, and Quagmire, which were initially characterized by mutual respect, become relationships in which Joe is frequently the target of contempt from the very friends he was introduced alongside. Peter, who in the first season was jealous of Joe's standing, becomes in the later seasons one of the people who diminishes Joe most consistently. The man who once wanted what Joe has over the years, transformed into someone who seems to need Joe to be smaller, who treats the friend he once admired as someone to be mocked rather than respected. This trajectory mirrors the broader arc of Peter's character, which we examined earlier in this video. Peter becomes meaner. The people around him suffer for it. But Joe's specific case is worth examining because of what it reveals about the show's relationship with heroism. Family Guy began with a hero on Spooner Street, a real one, a man whose integrity was visible and whose dignity was intact. And then, over 25 years of episodes, the show worked to remove that integrity and replace it with something smaller and more manageable. Something that could be laughed at without making the audience feel they were doing something wrong. Why does the show need Joe to not be a hero? What is it about the presence of genuine heroism on Spooner Street that the show, in its later seasons, found incompatible with its own tone? The answer is probably simpler than a conspiracy. A character who is genuinely admirable is hard to make funny in the ways that the later seasons of Family Guy preferred to be funny. Genuine dignity resists the kind of comedy that relies on humiliation and diminishment. So the dignity had to go. But within the show's fiction in the universe where Joe is a real person who has lived this arc, the story is different. A man who was a hero when he arrived on this street has spent 25 years watching his standing slowly erode in the company of friends who no longer treat him the way they once did. He was respected and now he is the butt of jokes. He was admired and now he is diminished. He has stayed on Spooner Street through all of it, continuing to do his job, continuing to be present for the friends who do not always deserve his presence. That is not the story of someone who became a joke. That is the story of someone who decided that the friendship was worth more than the dignity, and who has been paying the price of that decision for a very long time. Joe Swanson is still there, still at the table at the Drunken Clam, still showing up. The hero who the show turned into the joke, who keeps showing up anyway. Because that is what heroes do, even when the story around them has forgotten what heroism looks like. Number. Section 16. The Chicken Fight Mystery. An endless war with no beginning. We have discussed the chicken fights before in this video, but they deserve their own sustained attention because they represent something genuinely unique in the history of animated comedy. A recurring storyline that the show has returned to more than a dozen times over its run, that has never been resolved, that has no clear narrative function beyond its own existence, and that has accumulated, across its many iterations, a mythology of its own that the surrounding show has never adequately accounted for. The premise is simple. Peter Griffin and a giant anthropomorphic chicken named Ernie are enemies. They fight whenever they encounter each other. The fights are elaborate, extended, destructive beyond any scale that makes physical sense for their bodies, and they end always in a draw, both participants battered and exhausted but alive, separating to return to their respective lives until the next encounter. The cause of the conflict is an expired coupon that Ernie gave Peter, which Peter found insulting. The expired coupon. This is the explanation the show provides, and it is a comedy explanation. The gap between the triviality of the cause and the epic scale of the response is the joke. But the joke has been running for over 25 years. The fights have escalated in scale and duration with each appearance. The destruction they have caused has been enormous and has never had lasting consequence. The two participants have put each other through experiences that should, by any realistic measure, have ended the conflict through attrition, or through mutual exhaustion, or through the simple recognition that the cost of the fighting has long since exceeded the cost of the original insult. They keep going. Ernie has a wife. The show established this in the second chicken fight, revealing that Ernie is not simply a monster or a villain but a person with a domestic life, a person who has chosen to sustain this conflict alongside a normal existence of marriage and presumably work and community. He is not a creature defined only by his hatred of Peter. He has a life around it, and within that life, the ongoing war with Peter is apparently something he has chosen to maintain, the way one maintains any long-term commitment, not because the rewards are obvious, but because the commitment itself has become part of who he is. Peter is the same. The chicken fight is not the central feature of Peter's life. It cannot be, given how rarely the fights occur and how thoroughly he forgets about Ernie between encounters. But when the encounters happen, something in Peter rises to meet them that is different from his ordinary self. The fights reveal a version of Peter that is more focused, more physically capable, more sustained in purpose than the Peter of the surrounding episodes. He can absorb enormous punishment during the chicken fights and continue. This is not a feature of his character elsewhere. In regular episodes, Peter is injured easily and recovers conveniently. In the chicken fights, he becomes something else. What is the chicken fight actually about? The show's comedy answer is an expired coupon. The show's recurring mythology has made it something considerably larger. Two beings who cannot stop, who will not stop, who have each decided at some level that the conflict is worth sustaining despite its costs and its futility and its complete absence of resolution. The fan theory that the chicken fights are cross-dimensional events, that they are happening not in the primary reality of the show but in some adjacent space that both Peter and Ernie are accessing without understanding what they are accessing, is one of the more interesting frameworks for the mythology. It would explain why the destruction they cause never permanently alters the landscape of the show, why the buildings they collapse are standing again in subsequent episodes, why the scale of what they do to each other during the fights is never present in their bodies afterward. The fights happen somewhere else. The version of Peter who fights is a version that exists specifically in that somewhere else, and when the fight ends, he returns to Spooner Street, and the show continues as though the fight happened at a remove from ordinary consequence. In this reading, Ernie the Chicken is not an ordinary resident of the show's universe. He is something that exists in the space between realities, something that Peter periodically contacts through the mechanism of the fight, something that neither of them can fully explain because the meeting place exists outside the frameworks either of them has for understanding where they have been. The coupon was the first contact. The occasion for the first fight was the occasion for the first crossing. And now they keep crossing, because they have found something in that space, a version of themselves that neither the show nor they themselves have fully accounted for, and they cannot stop finding it. The fight never ends because the fight is not about winning. It never was. It is about being in that space with that version of yourself, doing the thing that the rest of your life does not have room for. Peter is ungovernable in the fights in a way he is not ungovernable anywhere else. Ernie is committed to something in the fights in a way that his domestic life presumably does not require of him. They meet. They become those versions of themselves. And then they separate and go back to what they were before, until the next time. 25 years. The coupon was expired. The war has never ended. The man and the chicken keep finding each other in the space between ordinary things and doing something that neither of them can explain and that the show around them does not try to explain. Some conflicts are not about resolution. Some conflicts are about the specific version of yourself that only exists when you are inside them. Peter Griffin found his in a parking lot over an expired coupon. He has been going back ever since. Number, Section 17. The Griffin Family Wealth Mystery. How does any of this work? Here is a question that almost nobody asks out loud but that every careful viewer of Family Guy has encountered in some form. How does this family afford to live the way they live? The surface answer is simple. Peter works at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery. He has worked there for most of the show's run, with occasional departures that never stick, always returning to his position in the shipping department. A brewery worker's salary in Rhode Island is real and functional, and would, in principle, be enough to support a family, though perhaps not at the level of comfort that the show's episodes occasionally assume. The Griffin family has a house on Spooner Street. They have a car. They go on holidays, sometimes elaborate ones. They get into situations that require resources, legal fees, medical expenses, the costs of the various catastrophes Peter's decisions regularly produce, and these situations are generally resolved without the family facing lasting financial ruin. None of this quite adds up. The house at 31 Spooner Street, while modest by the standards of what Lois came from, is a single-family home in a real state in the real northeastern United States. Property in Rhode Island is expensive. The mortgage payment on a house of that size, in that region, would represent a significant portion of a brewery worker's salary, particularly given that Lois is not employed in any sustained capacity across most of the show's run. The car is maintained. The children are fed and clothed and enrolled in school. The family drinks regularly at the Drunken Clam, which implies a disposable income that goes beyond the absolute minimum. The holidays happen. The medical bills are paid, presumably. Where does the money come from? The obvious answer, which the show occasionally gestures at without committing to, is Lois's family. The Pewter-Schmidts are extraordinarily wealthy, and while Carter's contempt for Peter is legendary and his opposition to the marriage has been consistent, it is not obvious that Carter has been entirely successful in cutting Lois off financially. There are episodes in which Carter helps the family, in specific circumstances, in ways that suggest the separation between Lois and her family's money has never been as complete as the show sometimes implies. A father who offers $1 million to prevent a marriage has $1 million to give. Whether some version of that money, in some form, has found its way to Spooner Street is a question the show has never directly answered. There is also the question of Lois's own assets. She married Peter. She did not necessarily arrive at the marriage with nothing. The show has focused so thoroughly on the contrast between the Pewterschmidt world and the Griffin household that it has somewhat neglected the question of what Lois brought with her when she moved to Spooner Street. She may have had resources of her own savings, investments, inheritance from other family members that have never been disclosed but that quietly underwrite the household's financial reality. Or there is a darker reading, one that connects to the simulation theory. If the Griffin household is an observation environment, if the people inside it are subjects of an ongoing study, then their financial sustainability is not a question the household itself needs to solve. The resources required to maintain the simulation would be provided by whatever organization is running it. Peter's salary at the brewery is real within the simulation's logic, but the actual resources sustaining the house, the car, the holidays, the medical bills, these come from outside the frame, from the budget allocated to the observation. The simulation keeps the subjects comfortable enough to produce the behavior the observation is interested in. It does not need to make the arithmetic work, because the arithmetic is not being done by anyone inside the simulation. In this reading, the Griffin family's impossible financial stability is one of the clearest signs that the world they inhabit is managed. Real families on brewery salaries in Rhode Island do not live quite this way. The gap between what Peter earns and what the household requires is not bridged by the Pewterschmidts. It is bridged by whoever is running the experiment. The subjects are kept in conditions that feel normal to them, conditions that match what they would expect from a comfortable, if not affluent working-class existence, conditions that do not create the kind of financial stress that would alter the behavior the observation is meant to study. The Griffin family is comfortable because comfort serves the study. They do not ask how they can afford things because the mechanism that provides for them is invisible to them, the way the mechanisms that sustain any managed environment are invisible to the subjects within it. They simply live. The bills are paid. The house stands. The beer is cold. And somewhere, the observation continues. Number. Section 18. The Pawtucket Brewery, more than a workplace. The Pawtucket Patriot Brewery is where Peter Griffin has worked for most of the show's run. It is the source of the Pawtucket Patriot Ale that Peter drinks, the product that the show treats as the defining beverage of the town's working-class culture, the employer that provides the backdrop for a significant portion of Peter's adult identity. It is also, in the show's recurring geography, one of the most consistent and most persistently unexplored locations in the entire universe of the series. The brewery employs people, it produces beer, it has a corporate structure that includes, at various points in the show's history, owners and executives whose personalities and decisions have affected Peter's employment and the town's economy. Angela, who managed Peter for many seasons before her death in a later episode, was one of the show's more interesting, recurring supporting characters. A woman who had a complicated relationship with both authority and with Peter specifically, whose presence in the brewery scenes gave those scenes a texture that pure workplace comedy would not have produced on its own. Her death in the episode HTT Peter, She Was Mauled by a Dog, which the show presents as a comedy moment, is one of the deaths that stuck. Angela did not come back. The brewery continued without her. The brewery's relationship to the town is worth examining. A brewery producing a beer that is specifically identified with the place Pawtucket Patriot, named for the city that is the town's neighbor in the real geography of Rhode Island, is not just an employer. It is a cultural institution. It ties the town's identity to a product. It is the thing that makes this place economically distinctive, the industry that has roots in the local landscape in a way that most employers do not. Peter works there not because any employer would do, but because the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery is specifically this town's thing. It belongs to the place the way places have things that belong to them. And yet the brewery is almost entirely opaque as a location. We know what floor Peter works on, more or less. We know that Angela managed him. We know that there have been ownership changes and corporate shifts that have affected Peter's position. But the brewery itself, its history, its relationship to the town, what it means that this specific product is produced in this specific place is never explored. In a town whose founding myth is about exiles building something in a place that did not officially exist, A brewery that produces a product named for patriotism, for the act of belonging to and defending a place, is an interesting thing to have at the economic center of the community. The Pawtucket Patriot, the Patriot of Pawtucket. The person who is loyal to this particular geography, the person who chose this place, who stayed, who built something here. Peter Griffin is the Pawtucket Patriot's most loyal employee and most devoted consumer. He works where the beer is made, and he drinks what he makes. There is a circularity in this that the show has never commented on, but that is quietly present in every episode that includes both the brewery and the bar. Peter makes the beer. Peter drinks the beer. The town is defined by the beer. The beer is named for loyalty to the place. And Peter, whatever his failures and contradictions, has always been here, has always come back here, has never, despite the various opportunities and adventures the show has put in his path, actually left in any permanent way. He is the Pawtucket Patriot. He just has never understood that about himself. Number. Section 918, Stewie's Rupert. What is the teddy bear? In the universe of Family Guy, there is a teddy bear named Rupert. He belongs to Stewie Griffin. He has belonged to Stewie for the entire run of the show. He goes everywhere Stewie goes. He is present in the nursery, present on adventures, present during the Road 2 episodes in which Stewie and Brian travel the world or the multiverse. He is, functionally, Stewie's most important relationship after Brian. Rupert is a stuffed animal. He cannot move on his own. He cannot speak. He cannot respond. Every conversation Stewie has with him is, from the perspective of the other characters in the show, Stewie talking to an inanimate object. The relationship is, in the objective terms of the show's universe, a one-sided attachment between a child and a toy. And yet, the show has, across its run, treated Rupert with a consistency and a seriousness that exceeds what a simple comedy prop would normally receive. Stewie's relationship with Rupert is portrayed as genuinely important to him, not as a joke about how weird it is that he is attached to a stuffed animal, but as a real relationship that has real stakes. When Rupert is threatened or damaged, Stewie's response is not comic. It is genuine distress. The episode in which Brian destroys Rupert while drunk, simply because he was tired of Stewie treating the bear as a real person, is one of the show's more uncomfortable moments. Not because the destruction is graphic, but because Stewie's response to it is real. He is genuinely bereft. He has genuinely lost something. What is Stewie's relationship with Rupert actually about? The show has occasionally treated Rupert as a real presence within Stewie's interior. Not as a character that other people can interact with. He remains a stuffed bear from the perspective of the show's objective camera, but as a presence that is real to Stewie in a way that exceeds ordinary childhood. Attachment. In scenes that access Stewie's imagination or internal experience, Rupert is sometimes animated, sometimes responsive. Sometimes the site of a genuine relationship rather than a one-sided projection. In the theory that the show is Stewie's perception of the world, Rupert occupies a specific and important place. He is the one relationship in Stewie's life that is entirely within Stewie's control. The adults around him are unpredictable, overwhelming, frequently absent in the specific ways he needs them to be present. Brian is real but has his own agency, his own moods, his own capacity to be unavailable. The family is real but enormous and careless and impossible to fully understand from the perspective of someone who is 1 year old and trying to make sense of a world that is vastly larger than he is. Rupert is always there. Rupert is always what Stewie needs him to be. Rupert is the one fixed point in a world that keeps moving in ways that a 1-year-old baby cannot control. The evil genius who builds time machines and plans world domination sleeps with a teddy bear. This detail is not a contradiction of the evil genius. It is the explanation of the evil genius. The desire for absolute control over time, over space, over the people around him comes from the same place as the attachment to the bear. From the experience of being small in a world that is too large, dependent in a world that does not always acknowledge the dependence, brilliant in a way that nobody around him has the capacity to meet. Rupert is what you hold on to when you are all of those things at once. The destruction of Rupert by Brian, drunk, careless, acting on a petty impulse, is the show's most honest depiction of how the people around Stewie fail him. Brian, who is supposed to be his closest friend, who is supposed to understand him better than anyone, destroys the one thing that Stewie has always been able to count on. And the show treats this as the act of a character who has lost his way, which Brian in the later seasons has. But it is also the act that reveals, more clearly than anything else, the vulnerability at the center of the show's most apparently invulnerable character. Stewie Griffin keeps his teddy bear. He always has. He always will. Whatever the weapons in the crib and the plans for world domination and the time machine and the British accent and the murder of Diane Simmons underneath all of it, there is a 1-year-old baby who has a bear he sleeps with. And the bear is the truest thing about him. Number, Section 20, the final mystery. Why does this show refuse to end? Every story has a question at its heart about when it should stop being told. The question is rarely about whether the story is exhausted. Stories, properly understood, are not exhausted by being told. They transform, they find new angles, they grow into new configurations of the same fundamental concerns. The question is about what the story is for, and whether continuing to tell it continues to serve that purpose. Family Guy has been asking this question for years. The show's own creator, Seth MacFarlane, has discussed it publicly. He has said that there was a period when he thought it was time for the show to end. He has also said, in a 2024 interview, that the show had reached what he called escape velocity, that it had been going long enough that there was no obvious moment to stop, that the audience still existed, that the show continued to serve purposes, including funding causes he cared about. He framed its continuation primarily in terms of utility rather than artistic necessity. The show goes on because it can, not because it must. This is an honest answer, and it is more honest than most creators are willing to be about the economics of long-running popular television. But it raises a question that the honest answer does not resolve. What does it mean for the characters in the show, for the people inside the fiction, who do not know they are in a fiction that the show refuses to end? In the theory that Family Guy is Peter's fantasy, the refusal to end is the refusal to grieve. Peter cannot allow the story to conclude because the conclusion of the story is the acknowledgement of what actually happened. As long as the fantasy runs, the family is still there. As long as there are new episodes, Meg and Chris and Lois and Stewie are still present in some form. The story does not end because the person telling it cannot bear the silence that would follow the ending. In the theory that Family Guy is a government simulation, the refusal to end is the refusal of the observation to conclude. The data is still useful, or the organization that is running the experiment has not decided it is no longer useful, or the bureaucratic inertia that sustains all large institutional projects has simply kept the funding flowing and the experiment running past the point where anyone in authority has had a good reason to stop it. The simulation continues because stopping it would require a decision, and decisions require reasons, and the absence of a compelling reason to stop is enough to sustain something indefinitely. In the theory that Family Guy is Brian's novel, the refusal to end is the writer's refusal to commit to a final page. Brian has been writing this story for 25 years. He has not finished it. He may be unable to finish it. Every episode of Family Guy is another chapter of a novel that its author cannot bring himself to conclude, because concluding it would require him to know what the story was actually about, and knowing that would require a clarity about his own life and his own nature that the writing process has been perpetually deferring. The novel goes on. The simulation continues. The fantasy holds. Season after season, the story persists. The characters do not age. The town stays where it needs to be. The bar is still open. And somewhere in the background of all of it, barely visible behind the comedy and the chaos and the decades of episodes, the questions breathe. The mystery of Meg's patient waiting. The mystery of what Stewie saw in the simulation. The mystery of what Brian knows that makes the morning difficult. The mystery of Lois's undisclosed history with the Pewterschmidts. The mystery of Peter's impossible biography. The mystery of the town that cannot be located on any consistent map. They are still there. They have always been there. They will be there for as long as the show runs, which based on the current renewal deal will be through at least 2029. 30 years of questions. 30 years of a town that exists in a zip code that points to nowhere. 30 years of a family that should not be able to sustain itself financially or emotionally or structurally but does. 30 years of a baby who was born to be something extraordinary and who has chosen, instead, to spend his evenings watching television with a dog and a teddy bear. 30 years of all of it, and the show keeps running, and the mysteries keep breathing, and the town keeps being exactly where it needs to be, which is everywhere and nowhere, and somewhere you keep returning to late at night when the noise is down, and the screen is the only light, and there is nothing around you but the show and the dark, and the quietly persistent feeling that something underneath the comedy is Trying to be noticed. It is always trying to be noticed. You just have to keep watching. Number. Section 21. The road to episodes. Where do they actually go? There is a specific category of Family Guy episode that deserves its own examination before we close, because it operates under rules that are fundamentally different from the rest of the show, and that illuminate things about the show's universe that the regular episodes cannot quite reach. These are the Road to episodes, the recurring format in which Stewie and Brian travel somewhere together, usually by accident or through misadventure, and the journey becomes the story. The first Road to episode was Road to Rhode Island in Season 2, in which Stewie and Brian travel across America to retrieve Stewie from his grandparents' house. The episode is the template for everything that follows. The two of them alone, away from the Griffin household, navigating the world without the buffer of the regular cast, discovering what their dynamic produces when the supporting structure has been removed. The episode established that Stewie and Brian together, away from home, are the most interesting combination the show can produce. That, without the surrounding chaos, stripped down to just the two of them and whatever they are traveling through, something clarifies. Something becomes visible that the regular episode format keeps partially obscured. The Road to. Episodes that followed Road to Europe, Road to Rupert, Road to Germany, Road to the Multiverse, Road to the North Pole, Road to Las Vegas, Road to India, Road to the Renaissance, Road to Cincinnati, and others are collectively the most consistently praised entries in the show's catalog. Critics who have otherwise given up on the series make exceptions for the Road to episodes. Fans who acknowledge that the regular format has declined make exceptions for the Road to episodes. Whatever the show is doing right, it does most of it most reliably when it sends these two characters away from home and lets them travel. But where exactly are they going? The destinations in the episodes are real places, mostly Europe, Germany, India, Las Vegas. But the way these places are rendered, the way the journey itself unfolds, the relationship between the destinations and the internal development of the two travelers, these are not the features of ordinary travel. The Road to episodes are something more like pilgrimages, trips taken not for the destination but for what the traveling reveals. Each episode in the format arrives at a different external place and the same internal one. The two of them, understanding each other more completely, understanding themselves more clearly, arriving at something neither of them could have reached without the journey. Road to the Multiverse is the clearest example of what the Road to format is actually doing, because in that episode the destination is not a place at all. It is every possible version of the reality they normally inhabit. They travel through the infinite structure of what could have been, through all the parallel versions of themselves and their world, and they arrive back where they started. The journey goes everywhere and ends at home. And the version of home they return to is exactly what it was when they left, except that they have been through infinity and back, and that has to leave some trace even if the show does not mark it explicitly. This is what all the Road to episodes are doing. In miniature, the destination is always ultimately home, not geographically, but existentially. The journey is always the process of understanding what home is and why it matters, by placing the relationship that sustains both of them outside the context in which it normally exists, and watching what happens to it in the exposure. The relationship holds. Every time, in every episode, regardless of where they go or what they encounter or how seriously things break down along the way, Stewie and Brian end up still together, still themselves, having traveled the distance and found their way back. The Road to episodes are the show's most sustained examination of what it means to be somewhere you cannot quite name, in the company of the one person who knows you well enough to be worth the journey. They are the most consistently tender things in the show's catalog, dressed up as adventure comedy, arriving quietly at the same conclusion every time, that the relationship is the destination, that wherever they go is less important than who they go there with. That home, for these two characters, is not a place on any consistent map. It is something they carry between them. In a show full of mysteries that refuse to resolve, the Road to episodes are the closest thing to an answer that Family Guy has ever produced. The answer is not a fact or a revelation. It is a feeling, a quality, the specific warmth that exists between two beings who have been to strange places together and have consistently chosen each other anyway. That warmth is real, even if nothing else in this universe is. That warmth exists even if the town cannot be located, even if the zip code points to nowhere. even if the characters do not age and the deaths do not stick and the geography keeps shifting. Stewie and Brian went to the multiverse. They went to every possible version of everything. And they came back here, to this town, on this coast, at this address that is not officially part of any country. They came back. That is, in the end, what love does. It comes back, regardless of where it has been. Number section 22. The neighborhood as character. Spooner Street's unspoken rules. Spooner Street is one of those fictional locations that becomes more interesting the less you treat it as simply a backdrop. It is not just the place where the show is set. It is a community, a small, specific community of people who have chosen each other, or been placed near each other, or stumbled into proximity and stayed there in the way that neighbors do, through inertia and habit and the slow accumulation of a shared context that makes moving elsewhere feel like a greater effort than continuing to be here. The street has a specific ecology. Peter and Lois at 31, Quagmire at 29, Joe and Bonnie at the house on the other side, Cleveland at another house along the block before he left for his own show and eventually returned, Herbert watching from his porch, the comings and goings of other residents who drift into and out of the show's attention without ever quite establishing themselves as permanent features. The whole community organized around the drunken clam a short distance away, the gravitational center of the adult social world, the place where the evenings happen. What are the unspoken rules of Spooner Street? Every community has them. The agreements that are never stated explicitly because they do not need to be. Everyone who belongs to the community already knows them, has absorbed them through proximity, and understands instinctively what can be said and what cannot, what can be done and what cannot, what the community will accommodate and what it will quietly push back against. These rules are usually more revealing than the explicit rules, because they reflect what the community actually values as opposed to what it says it values. On Spooner Street, the unspoken rules seem to be roughly these. You are loyal to the people on the street. Whatever your private conflicts, when something external threatens anyone here, you close ranks. You do not explain each other's behavior to people from outside the neighborhood. You keep showing up at the bar on the evenings when you are all supposed to be there. You accept certain things about each other that you would not accept from strangers. You accept Quagmire's history. You accept Brian's self-destructiveness. You accept Peter's thoughtlessness not because these things are acceptable in any absolute sense, but because the relationships are older and deeper than any particular incident. You do not force each other to account for the things that are hardest to account for. And you do not leave. This may be the most important unspoken rule of Spooner Street. Cleveland left, and the show followed him to Virginia, and then eventually brought him back. The gravitational pull of the street is too strong to resist permanently. Whatever draws people here, whatever keeps them here, the departure of any of them has always been temporary. They come back, the street absorbs them again. The community reestablishes itself as though the absence had never happened. Why does nobody leave Spooner Street permanently? The simulation theory has an answer. Subjects in an observation environment do not leave because the observation environment is designed to retain them. The fantasy theory has an answer. The people in Peter's mind do not leave because they are not capable of independent movement. They go where the fantasy puts them. The novel theory has an answer. Characters in an unfinished book do not leave because the author has not written them out. They stay where they were placed until the narrative requires them to move. But within the fiction itself, within the community of real people who have chosen or been placed or stumbled into this proximity, the reason nobody leaves Spooner Street permanently is probably the simplest reason there is. They belong to each other. Not always happily, not always well, not always in ways that would bear close examination. But belonging is not the same as happiness. It is something older and quieter and harder to uproot than happiness. It is the specific form of being known that exists between people who have been in each other's orbit long enough to stop performing and start simply existing in proximity, with all the complications that proximity produces. The neighbors of Spooner Street know each other in the way that only time produces. They have been through things together that they have not been through with anyone else. They have seen each other at their worst and continued to show up for the evening beer. They have caused each other harm and absorbed each other's harm and continued to be neighbors. They have the specific, inarticulate, difficult-to-defend loyalty that accumulates between people who have simply continued to be near each other through whatever the years have produced. This is what the show has built, under all the chaos and comedy and absurdism and darkness. A neighborhood. An actual neighborhood. with all the complicated love and obligation and familiarity and frustration that real neighborhoods contain, a place where people belong to each other even when they cannot quite justify why. A place where leaving is always possible and nobody does it permanently because the belonging pulls them back. The town may not be on any reliable map, the zip code may point to nowhere, the population may not support the infrastructure, but the neighborhood is real, the belonging is real, and whatever else Family Guy turns out to be fantasy, simulation, novel, or something else entirely that none of the theories have quite named, the belonging at the center of it is the thing the theories cannot explain away. The thing that persists regardless of which framework you apply. The thing that was there in 1999 and is still there now and will presumably still be there in 2029 when the current renewal runs out. A neighborhood on a street that does not officially exist, full of people who do not quite fit anywhere else, who have made something out of the proximity that the broader world could not have anticipated and cannot quite categorize. Something imperfect and genuine. Something that keeps showing up. That might be what Family Guy has always been. Underneath everything. A love story about a neighborhood. A quiet argument that even the most broken collection of people, in even the most improbable place, on even the most impossible street, can find a way to belong to each other. Not perfectly. Never perfectly. But persistently. And that, in the end, might be enough. Number, Section 23. The show that knows what it is. A final reflection. There is a moment in virtually every long-running show where the meta-awareness kicks in, where the show begins to comment on itself, to acknowledge what it has become, to build jokes and references around the fact of its own longevity and the reputation that longevity has produced. Family Guy reached this point many seasons ago and has been operating there ever since, making jokes about its own cancellation and revival, making jokes about its own quality in various periods, making jokes about the way critics perceive it, and the way fans argue about it, and the way it has endured well past the point where most shows would have stopped being culturally relevant. The self-awareness is a kind of honesty. A show that has been on the air for 26 years and has not pretended that 26 years of the same format is without complication, is a show that knows something real about itself. The jokes about its own creative choices, when they land because the show is not asking you to pretend those choices were all brilliant. It is asking you to be in on the awareness, to hold the appreciation and the criticism simultaneously, to love the thing without requiring that it be more than what it is. What is it? After all the theories, all the mysteries, all the sustained examination of what sits underneath the comedy, what is Family Guy, at the most fundamental level, it is a show about a neighborhood on a street that does not officially exist, full of people who do not fit neatly anywhere, who have found each other and who keep choosing the proximity even when the proximity is difficult. It is a show about a family that is imperfect in ways the comedy amplifies past the point of realism, but that underneath the amplification has a genuine emotional core, a man and a woman who love each other in the complicated way. That real people love each other across long marriages, children who are trying to find themselves in a household that does not always make that easy, friends who show up for each other with the specific loyalty of people who have been through enough together that the friendship is now its own kind of structure. It is a show that has been running for 26 years and that, despite everything, the creative changes, the character shifts, the debates about quality, the questions about whether it should still exist, has maintained the core of what it started with. A family, a neighborhood, a bar down the street, an impossible dog, a baby with a secret, questions that do not resolve, mysteries that breathe in the dark between the jokes. Tonight we have sat with the mysteries. We have followed the threads that do not lead to clean endings. We have spent time in the strange quiet that exists underneath 26 years of animated comedy, in the space where the questions live without answers. We have looked at Meg's patience and Brian's interior life, and Stewie's tenderness, and Lois's history, and Peter's impossible biography, and Quagmire's 61 years, and Joe's eroded dignity, and a town that moves, and a zip code that points to nowhere, and a bar that keeps standing, and a house that keeps existing in a space that official structures have never adequately accounted for. And we have not resolved any of it, because that is not what the show does. That is not, it turns out, what the mysteries are for. The mysteries are there so that you keep watching, so that you keep returning to the town, to the street, to the bar, to the house, so that each visit carries the slight weight of everything you have noticed before and the slight possibility that this time, this episode, this scene, some thread will be pulled in a direction that yields something new. The mysteries are the show's way of making sure that even after 26 years, the familiar has not become completely legible, that there is still something to find if you are watching closely enough, that the town still has corners you have not looked into yet, that the characters still have rooms you have not been allowed inside. This is what good storytelling does. Even in shows that are not primarily known for their storytelling, it holds something in reserve, it keeps something back. It makes the world of the story large enough that no amount of watching exhausts it. And Family Guy, for all its noise and chaos and the legitimate criticisms that have been made of it across its run, has done this. It has built a world that is larger on the inside than it appears from the outside. That contains more than it shows. That rewards the viewer who is willing to look at it from the angle that the comedy is not designed to direct you toward. Tonight you looked at it from that angle. You sat with the questions. You let the mysteries breathe. You kept watching after the comedy was done. That is what the show has always been asking you to do. It just never said so directly. Sleep well. The town will be there when you wake up. The mysteries will still be breathing. The beer will still be cold. And somewhere on Spooner Street, in the nowhere that has always been exactly where it needed to be, the light is still on in the Griffin house. It is always on. End of script. Number. A note on watching this show at night. There is something specific about watching Family Guy late at night that is different from watching it in the afternoon or during the early evening. Not dramatically different. Not so different that it produces a categorically other experience, but different enough that people notice it, and different enough that it seems worth naming before we close entirely. In the daytime, the show is comedy. The chaos is funny. The cutaways are gags. The characters are characters, familiar archetypes, in a familiar universe doing the things you already know they are going to do because you have watched enough episodes to have a sense of the patterns. The daytime version of Family Guy is the show most people know. Loud, aggressive, relentless, occasionally brilliant, occasionally tedious, always moving. At night, the same show becomes something slightly different. The comedy is still there, the chaos is still there, but something in the late hour, in the specific quality of the quiet around the noise, makes the space between the jokes larger, makes the pauses louder, makes the moments when the show unexpectedly drops its guard, the macaroni owl, the bank vault conversation, the Christmas time travel, the hurricane episode's confrontation and retreat land with a different weight, as though the night gives these moments more room to be what they actually are, rather than what the comedy frame requires them to appear to be. The show was designed to fill time, in the television sense, to occupy the hours, to give you something to watch while the night passes around you. This is not a criticism. Filling time is one of the oldest and most genuinely useful functions of storytelling. The campfire story, the traveling singer, the village elder with the long memory and the patience to turn it into a narrative. Entertainment that keeps you company through the dark is not lesser entertainment. It is a specific kind of craft, serving a specific and genuine human need. Family Guy, watched late at night when the house is quiet and the screen is the only light, serves that need, not just through the comedy, through the company, through the sense of being in a place you know well, with people whose names and habits you could recite from memory, whose absurdities have become familiar enough to be comfortable, whose ongoing existence in their impossible town feels like something reliable, something that will be there the next time you come back to it. The mysteries deepen this. They give you something to think about in the spaces between the laughs, something to turn over slowly, the way you turn over a stone at the bottom of a stream, not with urgency, not looking for anything specific, just with the idle curiosity of someone who has time and a willingness to be surprised by what the turning reveals. The town cannot be located. The zip code is nowhere. The baby has weapons in his crib. The dog should not be possible. The girl is waiting for something the show has never named. The family exists in a space that official structures have never claimed. Turn it over. Let the questions sit. There is no pressure to resolve them. There is no exam at the end. There is only the screen and the dark and the sound of a show that has been running since 1999 and is still going, still generating new episodes, still adding to the strange accumulated mythology of a Rhode Island town that exists at a zip code that points to nothing in a universe that may or may not be real. That is enough. Tonight, that is exactly enough.